Betty Doyle sat at the end of her own dining table while her daughter explained why the pottery shed was a gift. "It's land, Mom," Lauren said. "You have to remember that part." The dining room still smelled faintly of the lilies people had brought after Raymond's funeral. Most of them had gone brown at the edges. Betty had thrown away the worst arrangements that morning, but one white vase remained on the sideboard because she hadn't yet found the nerve to empty it. Lauren had arranged 3 folders beside her coffee. At 55, she had Raymond's habit of lining up papers before a difficult conversation. The difference was that Raymond used to keep his hands flat on the table. Lauren held a pen and tapped it against her thumb. Eric sat across from Betty, turning the probate order to read it sideways. He was 50 and had already asked twice how long this would take. The appraiser called it a demolition liability, he said. That was his exact phrase. Lauren gave him a look. She didn't want him making the offer sound worse before Betty signed the receipt, acknowledging the distribution. "It was valued at $18,000, Lauren said. "That's not nothing. The demolition might cost $18,000. That was one estimate." Betty watched the two of them talk around her. She had been doing that since Raymond died. People lowered their voices near her, carried plates from one room to another, and decided which matters could wait. Lauren had taken over the funeral calls because Betty couldn't remember the password to Raymond's email. Then she took over the bank appointments, then the insurance forms. By the time Betty understood how many decisions had been made, each one had become the reason for the next. She looked down at the last page. The house on North Main Street would pass to Lauren under the family distribution agreement. Most of the liquid estate, after funeral expenses and bills, would go to Eric. Betty had signed that agreement 6 weeks earlier in the same room, with a headache behind her right eye and Raymond's empty chair beside her. Lauren had said the arrangement would keep the house in the family. Eric had said he could manage the money and make sure Betty never had to worry. They had both said she would always be taken care of. Now Lauren needed her to acknowledge what she was receiving. The paper described the rear parcel and the Doyle pottery shed. It included the kiln, fixtures, tools, stored materials, and all contents on the property. Betty read that part again. "And the taxes?" she asked. Lauren stopped tapping the pen. "There are some overdue property taxes attached to the parcel." "How much?" "We went over this." "No, you said there were taxes. How much?" Eric leaned back. $12,400. Betty lifted her eyes. The refrigerator motor started in the kitchen. It had made that same low rattle for years, but the sound now seemed very loud. "When are they due?" Lauren pulled a notice from the bottom folder. "There's a county deadline in 60 days. We can ask about a payment plan." "You already asked," Betty said. Lauren's silence answered first. "They'll take a partial payment," she finally said. "But that won't stop the process unless the full balance is handled by the deadline." Betty folded her hands to hide how stiff her fingers felt. The knuckles had been swollen since the cold weather. Raymond used to warm her gardening gloves on the radiator before she went outside. He never mentioned doing it. She only noticed when he wasn't there. Eric pushed the order toward her. "This is why selling makes sense. There's a developer looking at parcels around Spring City. Vacation rentals, little cabins, that kind of thing. He might take it as is, for how much? He hasn't made an offer, so there isn't a buyer, there's interest." Lauren sighed. "Nobody is forcing you to decide today." They had said that about the family agreement too. Nobody was forcing her. They had simply placed papers in front of a grieving woman, explained what would be easiest, and waited until holding the pen became harder than signing. Betty picked up the probate order. "Does this mean the shed is mine now?" "The parcel is yours," Lauren said. "And everything in it?" Lauren glanced at the wording. "Yes, everything left there." Eric gave a short laugh. "That mostly means broken shelves and dried clay." Betty looked at him. He had smiled when he said it, hoping she would smile too. When Eric was uneasy, he tried to make the other person join him in pretending nothing serious had happened. Raymond had built the shed in the early 80s. For years, people drove from Salt Lake City and farther south to buy his bowls, pitchers, and wide stoneware platters. Betty kept the orders, mixed packing slips with lunch notes, and knew which galleries paid late. Terry Perkins worked beside Raymond when the place was new. Later, when Raymond's hands began to shake, he stopped taking large commissions and opened the kiln less often. The family called it a shed because that made neglect sound natural. It was really a low-brick workshop with a metal roof, 2 workrooms, a cramped office, and a kiln room built onto the north wall. Raymond had spent more waking hours there than in the house. Betty had spent enough time there to know which window stuck in summer and where he kept the good broom. She hadn't entered it since before his final illness. "Where's the key?" she asked. Lauren looked toward the kitchen counter. "There should be one on Dad's ring." "Your ring," Eric corrected. Lauren's mouth tightened. She had taken Raymond's keys the afternoon he died. Betty had seen her place them in a zippered pocket of her purse. At the time, it seemed sensible. Lauren was handling things. That phrase had covered a great deal. "The house key stays with me," Lauren said. "The closing papers are being recorded this week. I asked about the shed." "I know." Lauren went to the counter and opened her handbag. She removed a ring crowded with keys, reward tags, and a small brass disc Raymond had stamped with the letters R and D. She worked one key loose with her thumbnail. "I think this is it." Betty held out her hand. Lauren placed the key in it, but her fingers didn't release immediately. "The building isn't safe, Mom. Have you been inside?" "No." The appraiser looked through it. "Then how do you know?" "The roof leaks. The electrical service is old. There could be mold." Eric leaned forward. "And the kiln may have to be removed before anyone buys." "That's not a backyard grill. It's several tons of brick and metal." Betty closed her fingers around the key. Raymond had fired that kiln for more than 40 years. He had repaired cracks, replaced elements, rebuilt sections of brick, and kept a notebook of temperatures and handwriting that grew less steady with time. Eric knew none of that. He saw only weight that would cost money to haul away. "If it's such a burden," Betty said, "why does the developer want it?" "He wants the parcel," Eric said, "not the building. And Lauren wants the house." Lauren's expression changed. "That isn't fair." Betty waited. Lauren wanted to say the house had been her father's choice. She knew it wasn't. The agreement had been their choice, made while their mother moved through days without tasting food or sleeping longer than 2 hours. Lauren had told herself she was protecting the family home from being sold for Betty's care. It sounded responsible when she used those words. "Dad wanted things kept simple," Lauren said. Raymond never kept anything simple. For the first time that afternoon, Eric had no quick answer. Betty signed the acknowledgement, not because they had persuaded her, but because the order already existed and the shed was already hers. Her signature confirmed receipt. It didn't promise a sale. She capped the pen and slid it back to Lauren. "I'm going there." "Today?" Lauren asked. "Now." "Mom, it's nearly 4. It's 6 minutes away." Eric rubbed a hand over his face. "At least let me call the developer first." "No. You don't even know what you have. That makes 2 of us." Betty stood. Her left knee caught before it straightened. She rested 2 fingers on the table, waited for the joint to settle, and picked up the tax notice. Lauren watched her with the worried look she used when concern could still be useful. "Where are you staying tonight?" Betty turned toward the doorway. She had believed she was staying in the North Main Street house until Lauren finished preparing the small downstairs bedroom for herself and her husband. That had been the arrangement, if an arrangement was what you called 3 vague sentences after a funeral. Lauren looked away first. "The recorder could process the transfer any day," she said. "We should probably start sorting your things." "My things are already sorted." That morning, Betty had packed 1 blue suitcase. She had included 4 dresses, 2 pairs of slacks, her medicine, a framed photograph of Raymond at the wheel, and the old green sweater he claimed had shrunk in the wash. It hadn't shrunk. He had grown broader through the middle and refused to admit it. The suitcase stood beside the coat closet. Eric noticed it and sat upright. "You packed?" "I did." "Where are you planning to go?" Betty put on her coat. "To see what I own." Neither of them followed her outside. The air had turned sharp, carrying the dry smell of dust and chimney smoke. Spring City sat quiet beneath the late winter sky. Snow remained in gray strips along shaded fences, though the road was clear. Betty placed the suitcase in the back seat of her sedan. She didn't look at the front windows of the house. If Lauren appeared there, Betty didn't want to know. The Pottery stood behind a row of leafless trees on the rear parcel, reached by a narrow gravel drive branching from North Main Street. Raymond's hand-painted signs still hung near the road. One chain had broken, leaving it tilted. Doyle Pottery could still be read beneath years of sun and dirt. Betty turned into the drive. Dead weeds scraped the underside of the car. The workshop appeared slowly beyond the trees. Its roof sagged near the western corner, and a strip of metal flashing knocked softly in the wind. 2 windows were boarded. The chimney above the kiln room stood straight. She parked near the office door. For several minutes she remained behind the wheel, holding the tax notice in one hand and the small key in the other. She had $12,400 in overdue taxes, 60 days to pay them, and less than $6,000 in savings that Lauren and Eric hadn't touched because the account was only in Betty's name. She also had a building nobody believed was worth saving. What she didn't know was whether the roof had ruined the office, whether the electrical service could be made safe, or why Raymond had come here during the last months of his life when he told everyone he was too tired to work. She got out of the car. The gravel shifted beneath her sensible black shoes. She walked to the office door and inserted the key. It went halfway in, then stopped. Betty tried again. The lock was packed with dirt. She returned to the car, opened the glove compartment, and found a small bottle of hand sanitizer, 2 paper napkins, and the narrow metal nail file she kept in an old eyeglass case. She worked the file gently along the keyway, clearing grit without forcing the pins. Raymond had shown her how to do that after a clay delivery driver broke a key in the storeroom lock. A few dark grains fell onto the step. She inserted the key again. This time, it went in fully, but wouldn't turn. Betty leaned close. The door had dropped against the frame. She put one shoulder beneath the handle, lifted while turning, and heard the bolt move. The door opened 3 inches before catching on something inside. She pushed harder. A cardboard box scraped across the floor. Cold, stale air came through the gap, carrying dust, damp wood, and the mineral smell of old clay. Betty stepped inside. The office was narrow enough to cross in 4 strides. Water had stained one ceiling corner, but the floor beneath it was dry. Raymond's desk remained against the wall. A cracked vinyl chair sat behind it. Shelves held glazed records, receipts, and cloudy jars of pencils. Someone had draped a canvas cloth over the small electric heater. The room was neglected, but it wasn't destroyed. Betty checked the ceiling with the flashlight on her phone. The stain was old and dry around the edges. She pressed the wall beneath it. The plaster felt firm. Then she noticed the folding cot behind the desk. Raymond had used it when a firing ran overnight. Betty pulled it open. The canvas sagged, but the frame held. A wool blanket lay folded on the shelf above it, sealed inside a plastic bag. That was her first useful answer. She wouldn't have to ask Lauren for a bed that night. Betty carried in her suitcase, set it beside the cot, and locked the office door from the inside. Then she cleared a circle of dust from Raymond's desk with one of the paper napkins. Underneath was a dark ring from his coffee cup and a handwritten list held down by a lump of dried clay. Most of the words concerned ordinary repairs. Replace vent belt. Check roof flashing. Call Terry. The last line was darker, pressed so firmly that the pencil had scored the paper. Do not fire again until loading wall is opened and checked. Betty read it twice. Then she looked through the office window toward the kiln room, where the fading light caught the old brick chimney. She took out her phone and wrote down Terry Perkins's name before the room became too dark to see. The call went to voicemail. You've reached Terry Perkins. Leave your name and number, and I'll get back to you. Betty gave her name, then paused because she didn't know how much to say. I'm at the Pottery. I found a note from Raymond about the kiln loading wall. I need someone to tell me whether the building is safe. Please call when you can. She ended the call and set the phone on the desk. The temperature in the office had dropped since sunset. Betty could feel it through the soles of her shoes. She found the electrical panel behind the door, but someone had tied the main switch in the off position with a red plastic tag. The tag had no company seal. Raymond had probably done it himself. She didn't touch it. The sink in the corner produced one cough of brown water, then nothing. She turned both taps off and checked beneath the cabinet. The pipes were dry. A note taped to the drain read, "Water off at street." Raymond's handwriting again. The building had a cot, but not heat or water. That was the difference between a place to sleep and a home, and Betty knew better than to confuse the two. She put on the green sweater beneath her coat. It smelled only faintly of the cedar drawer where it had been stored. Then she spread the wool blanket over the cot and sat with her phone in her lap. There were 3 missed calls from Lauren. Betty called her back. "Where are you?" Lauren asked. "At the Pottery. You're still there?" "I said I was coming here. You said you were going to see it. You didn't say you planned to stay." Betty looked at her suitcase. "I brought my clothes." Lauren went quiet. In the background, a cupboard closed. Betty knew the sound. Her daughter was in the kitchen on North Main Street, probably standing beside the counter where Betty had rolled pie crusts for most of Lauren's life. "Mom, the building doesn't have an occupancy permit, neither did the treehouse your father built for Eric. This isn't funny, I'm not laughing. You can come back tonight. We'll talk in the morning." "Come back where?" "To the house. Your house." Lauren breathed out slowly. She had always disliked a question that left her nowhere comfortable to stand. "It's still your home," she said. Betty almost accepted that. The words reached the part of her that wanted to make supper, wipe the dining table, and hear Lauren moving upstairs. Home had always been the place where someone needed a clean towel and knew Betty would find one. Then she pictured the blue suitcase beside the cot. Where would I sleep? The downstairs room. Is there a bed in it? Not yet. We can put one in. When? Soon. Betty rubbed her thumb across the swollen joint of her first finger. The downstairs room held boxes from Lauren's old house, a treadmill, and 4 dining chairs nobody wanted. Lauren knew that. She had invited Betty back because inviting sounded kind. There was no bed because no one had actually planned for Betty to remain. "I'll get a motel room tonight," Betty said. With what money? The question was quick and practical. It still landed hard. "I have money. You have less than $6,000 and a tax bill twice that size." "I know what I have. I'm trying to help." Betty closed her eyes. "I know." Those 3 words had ended many family arguments. They could mean thank you, stop, or I'll give in later. Lauren heard the version she wanted. "Good," she said. "Go somewhere warm. I'll bring breakfast in the morning, and then we can make a sensible plan." Betty agreed because she was tired. Agreeing had once kept the household moving. It had prevented Raymond and Eric from shouting across the dinner table. It had kept Lauren from leaving Christmas lunch over a remark she misunderstood. Betty had treated peace like a job only she could do. She locked the office and drove to a motel south of town. The room cost $86 after tax. It had a humming wall heater, a flowered bedspread, and a bathroom light that took several seconds to come on. Betty filled a paper cup at the sink and swallowed her evening tablets. She placed Raymond's green sweater over the back of a chair. Then she counted the cash in her wallet and checked her bank balance on her phone. $5,829. She subtracted the motel room, though it had already been charged. She did it again because numbers behaved when people didn't. A roof repair might take most of what she had. Electrical work could take the rest. The taxes remained beyond both. Betty lay on the bed without undressing. The heater clicked off and woke her each time it started again. At 6:30, Terry returned her call. His voice was deeper than she remembered. "Mrs. Doyle? It's Betty." "Betty. Of course. I'm sorry to call this early. I was awake. I heard about Raymond. I should have come by. You sent a card. A card isn't coming by." She sat up and reached for her glasses. "Terry, did Raymond speak to you about the kiln?" "Not lately. I found a note. It says not to fire again until the loading wall is opened and checked." Terry was quiet long enough for Betty to hear a truck passing outside. "He called me last summer about the vent system," he said. "Asked whether I could still get belts for that old fan. Did you go out there?" "No. We said a day, then he canceled. Said the room wasn't ready." "Ready for what?" "He didn't say." "Did you ask?" "I figured he had a cracked brick or a bad element." Raymond didn't like anyone seeing a job halfway done. That was true. He would let Betty see clay collapsed on the wheel or glaze running off a test tile, but he hid unfinished work from nearly everyone else. "Can you inspect it?" she asked. "I can look. I don't fire kilns for customers anymore. I'm not asking you to fire it." "Then yes." "When?" "I've got a furnace repair near Ephraim this morning. I could be at the Pottery around 1. Betty felt the first small loosening in her chest since she entered the building. "What do you charge? Let me look before we discuss that." "No." "Tell me." He hesitated. 75 for an inspection. "I'll pay 75. "All right. Terry, Lauren, and Eric don't know what the note means. Neither do I." "I understand. Please keep it that way until we do." He didn't sound offended. "It's your kiln room now," he said. "I'll speak to you." After the call, Betty showered and dressed in gray slacks and a clean blouse. She folded the motel soap into a washcloth and put it in her suitcase. Raymond used to tease her for taking open soap home. "It's already paid for," she would tell him. Now the small wrapped bar felt less like thrift and more like evidence that every dollar had become a decision. Lauren's car was waiting at the Pottery when Betty arrived. She had brought 2 coffees and a paper sack from the bakery. She stood beside the office door in a camel-colored coat, looking at the broken chain on the sign. "You didn't answer," she said. "I was driving. I called the motel." Betty stopped near her. "How did you know which one?" "There are only 2 nearby." Lauren held out a coffee. It had cream and cinnamon in it. Betty drank coffee black. Raymond had taken cream and cinnamon. She accepted the cup anyway. Inside the office, Lauren placed the bakery sack on the desk and looked around without removing her coat. She noticed the open cot, the blanket, and Betty's suitcase. "You actually brought this in." "I didn't want to leave it in the car." "I thought we agreed you'd stay somewhere warm." "I did." Lauren opened the sack. She had bought 2 cheese pastries. Betty couldn't eat much cheese before noon without getting sick, a fact Lauren once knew. Betty tore off one corner and held it. Lauren began moving papers into a pile to clear space. She did it automatically, the same way she had reorganized the medicine cabinet after Raymond came home from the hospital. "Don't move those," Betty said. Lauren stopped with the repair note in her hand. "What is this?" "Something your father wrote. I can see that." Betty took it from her and set it back beneath the dried clay. "Did he leave instructions?" "No." "Then why are you acting secretive? I asked you not to move it." Lauren stared at her. Betty rarely corrected either of her grown children in a tone that required them to obey. She usually softened requests before anyone could resent them. "Fine," Lauren said. "I was making room for breakfast." Betty sat in Raymond's chair. The cracked vinyl gave a familiar squeak. "Whose idea was the family agreement?" Lauren lowered herself onto the cot. "We all discussed it. You and Eric discussed it. Then you brought it to me. We discussed it with you. You told me the house needed to stay in the family." "It does. You told me Eric would manage the money. He understands investments better than you do." Betty set down the pastry. "I kept the Pottery books for 36 years. That's not the same." "No, it isn't. Those books involved invoices, payroll, taxes, gallery commissions, shipping, and keeping enough cash for Clay before the winter orders were paid. What did you think I was doing out here? I know you helped Dad." The word "helped" sat between them. Lauren hadn't intended it as an insult. That made it worse. In her mind, Raymond had made Pottery and Betty had helped. Raymond earned, Betty managed. Raymond decided, Betty made those decisions work. After enough years, even Betty had begun describing it that way. She looked toward the shelves of Glaze records. "I should have read every page before I signed," she said. "Mom, you were grieving. So were you. I was trying to get things done, and I let you." Lauren's face softened. She believed they had reached the part where Betty admitted she couldn't manage without her. Betty continued, "I let you because it was easier than asking why my future had become an item you and Eric could arrange." Lauren stood. "That's not what happened." "Then tell me where you expected me to live." "I told you. The downstairs room. There's no bed. We can buy a bed. When the house has already passed to you. You're my mother. You don't need your name on a deed to stay with me." Betty heard the promise Lauren meant to offer. She also heard the rule inside it. Betty could stay because Lauren allowed it. She could be safe by remaining agreeable, grateful, and easy to house. For years, Betty had believed family belonging came from being needed. If she kept records, remembered birthdays, carried the spare keys, and prevented arguments, nobody could set her outside the circle. Now she saw the weakness in that bargain. The moment other people decided they didn't need her work, they treated her place as something they could loan back. A vehicle turned onto the gravel drive. Lauren went to the window. An aging white pickup stopped beside her car. Terry climbed out wearing work boots and a canvas jacket. His hair had gone almost completely white, but Betty recognized the careful way he closed the truck door with one hand while protecting the metal toolbox in the other. "Who is that?" Lauren asked. "Terry Perkins. What's he doing here?" "He's inspecting the building." "You hired someone?" "Yes." Lauren looked from Terry to Betty. "With what money?" "My money." "Before speaking to me?" Betty picked up the office key from the desk. The question was so ordinary that Lauren didn't seem to hear what it revealed. She had grown used to being consulted first. Betty had helped create that habit by surrendering decisions whenever resistance seemed likely to cause trouble. Terry knocked once and waited outside. Betty opened the door. He removed his cap. "Morning. Thank you for coming." His eyes moved past her to Lauren, then back. "Where would you like me to start?" Betty felt the key press against her palm. The building was cold, the tax deadline remained, and she still didn't know whether she could afford to keep any part of it, but the contractor had asked her. She stepped aside and pointed toward the main workroom. "Start with the roof and electrical service," she said. "Then I want you to show me everything that makes this place unsafe." Terry set the toolbox beside the office wall and looked up at the ceiling stain. "Has anyone turned on the power?" "No," Betty said. "Good." Lauren remained near the desk. The appraiser said the service was obsolete. Did he open the panel? "I don't know." Then he saw an old box and made a guess. Terry pulled on a pair of safety glasses. He didn't sound offended on the building's behalf. He sounded like a man separating what he knew from what other people had assumed. Betty appreciated that more than she expected. They walked into the main workroom. Weak daylight passed through the dirty windows. 2 pottery wheels stood beneath canvas covers. A long table filled the center of the room, its wooden top scarred by wire tools and damp clay. Cupboards lined the south wall. Raymond's aprons still hung from hooks beside the wash sink. Lauren stopped at the doorway. "I haven't been in here since Dad's memorial display," she said. "That was at the gallery," Betty said. "I meant before that." Betty knew what she meant. Lauren wanted to establish that the room mattered to her, though she couldn't remember the last time she entered it. Terry moved slowly beneath the damaged section of roof. He pressed a moisture meter against the wall, checked the window frames, and climbed a short ladder to inspect the ceiling boards. "The leak's around the flashing," he said. "Maybe 2 places. The roof hasn't failed." "So it can be repaired?" Betty asked. "Yes, it needs repair soon, but it isn't ready to fall on anyone." Lauren crossed her arms. "What about mold?" "I don't see growth. I see water staining." "That doesn't mean there isn't mold." "No, it means I don't see it." Terry climbed down. Betty watched Lauren's face. Her daughter wasn't hoping the building was dangerous. She was hoping the matter would become simple. An unsafe building could be sold or demolished. A repairable one required choices. Terry carried the ladder outside. Betty followed while Lauren stayed in the doorway. He walked the perimeter, checking the foundation and the lower brick. At the rear corner, he knelt beside a pipe emerging from the ground. "This is your water shutoff. There's a note saying it's off at the street. Raymond shut it here too." Terry removed the cap and worked the valve gently with a wrench. It didn't move. "Don't force it," Betty said. He looked up and smiled slightly. "I wasn't going to. Raymond broke the old greenhouse valve by forcing it. I remember, he blamed the wrench. They both knew he had blamed Terry first." Betty crouched carefully beside him. A patch of ice remained beneath the pipe, protected from sunlight by the wall. "Can it be opened?" "Not today. The packing is dried out and the handle's nearly rusted through. A plumber can replace the valve. Before that, someone should pressure test the inside lines." "What would that cost?" "For the valve and basic test, maybe a few hundred, more if the pipes split." Lauren had come outside, and if they did, then it depends where. "That's exactly the problem," she said. "Every answer leads to another expense." Terry stood and wiped his gloves on his jeans. "That's how buildings work." Lauren looked at Betty. "Can I speak to you alone?" Betty's first instinct was to agree. She felt it in her body before she made the decision. The small tightening that meant she was preparing to smooth another conversation. Instead, she said, "Terry's working." Lauren lowered her voice anyway. "You can't hire repairs one at a time without knowing the total." "I haven't hired repairs." "You brought in a contractor. I brought in someone who knows the kiln. This is how it starts. An inspection, then a valve, then wiring, then the roof. You'll spend everything trying to save a building Dad stopped using." Terry turned toward his truck, giving them the privacy Lauren had requested without leaving the property. Betty watched him remove a voltage tester from another case. "Raymond came here last summer," she said. Lauren frowned. "How do you know?" "He called Terry about the vent. So, you told me he'd stopped working a year before he died." "He had." "Then why was he repairing the kiln vent?" Lauren's face changed. "Not much, but enough." "I don't know. Dad did strange things when he got sick." It was the kind of answer that could explain everything, because it explained nothing. "Did you ever ask him," Betty said, "about a fan belt?" "No." "Did you come out here?" "I was taking him to appointments. I was filling prescriptions. I was handling the house. I couldn't follow him every time he went into an old workshop." Betty heard the truth inside Lauren's defensiveness. Lauren had done those things. She had also decided that whatever happened at the pottery no longer mattered. I'm not accusing you, Betty said. It sounds like you are. I'm asking what you knew. I knew he was ill. I knew you were exhausted. I knew somebody had to take charge. Betty looked down at the gravel. There it was again. Somebody had to take charge, and Betty had been grateful when Lauren did. She had handed over passwords, keys, appointment cards, and eventually judgment itself. Now every question sounded to Lauren like ingratitude. I'll call you later, Betty said. Come to the house for dinner, not tonight. Mom, I have an inspection to finish. Lauren pressed her lips together. She walked to her car, then stopped before opening the door. Eric has the name of the developer, she said. At least let him get a written offer. You don't have to accept it. Not yet. That could cost you. So could accepting it. Lauren got into the car. Gravel snapped beneath her tires as she backed down the drive. Terry returned carrying the tester. I can come another day if this is causing trouble. The trouble was here before you arrived. He nodded once. The electrical panel stood in a narrow storage room between the workroom and kiln room. Terry removed the red tag and opened the metal door without switching anything on. The wiring inside was orderly, but old. Each circuit had been labeled in Raymond's square handwriting. Office, wheels, lights, kiln vent. The main kiln supply had its own larger disconnect closer to the firing room. Terry traced the service line to the exterior wall. The box isn't obsolete, he said. But you need an electrician. There's corrosion at the bottom, and this breaker has heat discoloration. Can the office circuit be separated from the rest? Probably. An electrician could test it and give you one safe line for heat and lights while other work is done. That possibility changed the shape of the room in Betty's mind. A working heater would let her stop paying for the motel. A lamp would let her sort papers after sunset. Will you give me the name of someone? She asked. I know a licensed electrician in town. I'll call from the truck. No favors. It isn't a favor to make a call. The inspection is $75. Yes. And calls are included? Terry gave her a patient look. Calls are included. He checked the wheel cords and the outlets without energizing them. Several cords had cracked insulation. One outlet near the sink had pulled loose from the wall. He marked each problem with blue painter's tape. Betty wrote everything in a small notebook she found in the desk. She separated urgent work from work that could wait. Roof flashing, office circuit, water valve, ventilation. The list was shorter than Lauren feared and longer than Betty could easily afford. Terry opened the kiln room door last. The smell there was different. Dry brick held a faint trace of smoke, hot metal, and old glaze. The large kiln occupied most of the room. Its steel frame had dulled with age, and pale insulating brick lined the square chamber. Shelves and posts were stacked along one wall. The ventilation hood hung above the loading side. Betty remained near the door. She had watched hundreds of firings, but the kiln room without Raymond felt private. He used to stand here with his glasses pushed onto his forehead, reading cones through the spy hole and pretending he wasn't nervous. Terry checked the hood first. He reached into the fan housing and turned the blades by hand. The belt's gone. Broken? Removed. He pointed to two loose bolts resting in a shallow dish on the floor. Raymond took the housing apart. He didn't finish. Could he have used the kiln without it? He shouldn't have. That wasn't my question. Terry glanced at her. Yes. He could have opened the outside door and used a portable fan. He did that years ago, before we installed this system. Betty remembered the fan. It had been loud enough to interrupt conversations in the office. I never heard it, she said. When were you last here during a firing? She tried to recall. Raymond had stopped telling her when he came to the Pottery. During his final year, his good mornings were precious. Betty used them for pharmacy trips, laundry, and sleep. If he said he was going outside to sit in the sun, she didn't follow. Not during his last year, she said. Terry inspected the hood, then the kiln door. He ran his hand along the metal frame and tested the latch. This was fired after I last serviced it. When was that? 2 years ago. How can you tell? The witness cone holders were cleaned. I left residue in this corner because Raymond told me not to waste time scraping it. He scraped it. That only means he cleaned. Terry pointed to the kiln's outer frame. A thin blue-gray mark showed above the loading edge. This changed color from heat. Not enough to damage it. Enough to show a firing. Betty moved closer. Could that mark be old? Not older than my last service. I replaced that piece. The room became very still. Raymond had fired the kiln after telling everyone he had stopped working. That didn't prove what he made or whether anything survived. It did prove that Lauren's version of his final year was incomplete. Terry crouched to inspect the lower courses of brick. He pressed one gently. It shifted beneath his glove. That shouldn't move. He removed no brick. He only swept dust from the joint with a soft brush. Behind the loose outer course, a narrow seam ran vertically through the loading wall. The brick beside it was darker than the surrounding surface. Not smoke-blackened, but browned by concentrated heat. Betty leaned closer without touching it. What caused that? Could be a repair. You don't sound certain. I'm not. Did you build that seam? No. Did Raymond? Possibly. Terry shone a light across the wall. The seam continued downward, disappearing behind kiln furniture stacked near the base. Could it be a crack? Too straight. Betty studied the bricks. Raymond's repairs were usually neat, but he matched old mortar carefully. This line looked different, deliberate but hurried. Can you open it? She asked. Not safely today. Why not? We don't know what's supporting the inner wall. If Raymond changed the loading chamber, these bricks may be carrying weight they weren't meant to carry. The vent doesn't work, and there's loose refractory dust. I'd want extraction running before we disturb anything. How long? To repair the vent, inspect the masonry, brace the opening, and remove brick properly? A few weeks, depending on parts. And the cost? Terry stood. I need to price it. Give me the bad version. Several thousand if the inner wall needs rebuilding. Betty looked toward the dark seam. The one deliberate thing she had done had worked. She had hired the right person, and he had confirmed that Raymond used the kiln after everyone believed he had stopped. But the answer sat behind a wall she couldn't afford to open, inside a building she couldn't yet safely occupy. Terry shut off his flashlight. I can't tell you what he changed, he said. Only that someone changed it after my last service. Raymond didn't let anyone else work on this kiln. I know. Outside, Terry called the electrician. She could come the following morning to test the office circuit. The roof contractor could inspect the flashing later that week. Betty paid Terry $75 in cash and asked him to write a receipt. He did, then wrote 4 words beneath the amount. Kiln loading wall inspection. Betty folded the receipt into her notebook. Before Terry left, she locked the kiln room and placed its key on a separate ring from the office key. The motel would take another $86 if she returned that night. Repairs would take thousands. The county would not care what Raymond had done behind a row of darkened bricks. Betty stood in the main workroom and called the motel desk. I won't need the room tonight, she said. Then she unfolded the cot, put on Raymond's green sweater, and waited for daylight to fade while the sealed kiln room remained locked beside her. The cold reached her hands first. Betty tucked them beneath her arms and listened to the building settle. Wind moved over the metal roof. Somewhere in the main workroom, a loose blind tapped against a window frame. She didn't sleep much, but she stayed. At 7, she heated water on a small camping stove outside the office door. The stove had been in a cupboard with Raymond's firing supplies. She made instant coffee in a glaze-stained mug, then washed the mug with bottled water from her car. The electrician arrived shortly after 8. She tested the service, replaced the damaged breaker, and separated the office circuit from the workroom circuits. The corrosion was limited to the bottom of the box. You were right not to turn it on, she told Betty. It might have held. It might not. By 10, the office had one working outlet, a safe overhead light, and a small electric heater Terry brought from his garage. The bill came to $640. Betty wrote the amount in her notebook before paying. The heater smelled of hot dust for the first few minutes. Then warm air began moving across the floor. Betty stood in front of it with her palms open. One room was usable. It wasn't a house yet. The toilet didn't flush, and she still had to drive to the public library for a bathroom. But the cot no longer felt like a dare. She spent the rest of the morning clearing Raymond's desk. She didn't throw anything away. She made 3 piles, bills, pottery records, and personal papers. Her fingers slowed her. Each paperclip had to be opened carefully. Twice, pain caught at the base of her thumb and made her drop what she was holding. She found old clay invoices, shipping receipts, and a calendar from the previous year. Raymond had marked medical appointments in blue ink and pottery days in red. The red entries became less frequent as the months passed. Near the end of summer, one entry read, Wanda, final form. Betty touched the words. She checked the papers beneath the calendar and found a carbon copy of a gallery intake sheet. Raymond's name appeared at the top. The description line read, "Large vessel, title pending. No sale price had been entered." Across the bottom, someone had written, "Withdrawn by artist before delivery." The handwriting belonged to Wanda Oliver. Betty called the number printed on the sheet. Wanda answered on the fourth ring. "Oliver Gallery. Wanda, it's Betty Doyle." The silence lasted only a breath. "Betty, I've been meaning to call you. You came to the funeral. I meant after. Everyone had meant after. After the flowers, after the papers, after Betty could speak without making other people uncomfortable. I found one of your intake sheets," Betty said. "It mentions a large vessel." Wanda didn't answer immediately. "Where did you find it?" "In Raymond's desk." "You're at the Pottery?" "Yes." "I thought Lauren was arranging a sale." "Lauren isn't arranging anything here." Wanda heard the firmness in Betty's voice and adjusted her own. "All right," she said. "What do you want to know? Did Raymond make the vessel?" "He was making it. Did you see it?" "I saw the form before the first firing. It was still damp. He'd built it in sections because it was too large to throw in one piece." Betty looked through the office doorway toward the covered wheels. "How large?" "A little over 3 feet, maybe." "He wouldn't let me measure it." "That sounds like him. He was excited about it. Frightened too, though he wouldn't have used that word." "What happened?" "He called and withdrew it from the autumn exhibition. He said it wasn't ready and wouldn't be delivered." "When was that?" "About 3 weeks before he went into the hospital." "Did he say it had failed?" "No." "Did he say he destroyed it?" "No." "Did you see it again?" "I didn't." Betty looked at Raymond's penciled note. "Do not fire again until loading wall is opened and checked." "Did he tell you he fired it?" Wanda hesitated. "He said he had one firing left in him. That was the last thing he said about the work. That isn't the same as saying he did it." "No." "Then we don't know." "No," Wanda said, "we don't." Betty appreciated that answer. Wanda didn't turn uncertainty into hope merely because grief was listening. "There's something odd about the kiln wall," Betty said. "What kind of odd?" "I don't know yet. Terry found a seam, and there are signs the kiln was fired after his last service." This time Wanda's silence was longer. "Don't remove anything," she said. "We haven't." "If Raymond changed the chamber, there may be unstable brick." Terry said the same. "I wasn't only thinking of the brick." Betty waited. Wanda lowered her voice, though no one else was on the line. "If the vessel survived, moving it without support could damage it. Large fired work can crack under its own weight. You're getting ahead of what we know." "Yes," Wanda said. "I am." Betty looked down at the intake sheet. "Why did Raymond give you a form for something he hadn't finished?" "He didn't. I filled it out when I visited. I was trying to reserve wall space and put it in the catalog early. He told me I was tempting the kiln. That sounds like him too. He made me cross out the price." "There was a price?" "A working estimate." "How much?" "It would mean nothing now. I saw an unfinished form, not a finished piece." "Tell me anyway." "No, not until there's something to assess." Betty nearly pressed her. Then she recognized what Wanda was protecting. A number could turn a sealed wall into whatever the listener needed it to be. Betty already had 2 children searching for certainty where none existed. "Can you come here?" she asked. "When?" "Today. I'm opening the gallery at noon, after you close." Wanda considered it. "I can be there around 5. I'll wait." After the call, Betty copied the intake information into her notebook and returned the original to the pottery pile. The roof contractor arrived at 1. He replaced 2 sections of flashing and sealed the worst leak before the afternoon wind rose. The repair cost $490, with another section likely needed before winter. Betty paid him $2. By the time he left, she had spent more than $1,000 in 2 days, including the motel, Terry's inspection, bottled water, and a new smoke detector. The tax figure remained unchanged. She took 2 pain tablets with a cheese cracker and sat beside the heater. Her hands throbbed from sorting papers. For several minutes, she considered calling Eric and asking him to arrange the developer's offer. She could let someone else solve the money problem. That was how the family agreement had begun. One person solved the house, another solved the accounts. Betty signed because signing let her stop deciding while Raymond's coat still hung near the door. She picked up the intake sheet again. Before his final illness, Raymond had been building something large enough to frighten an experienced gallery owner. He had withdrawn it, fired the kiln, and changed the loading wall. Those facts didn't promise value. They did give Betty a reason to stop treating the workshop as rubble awaiting a buyer. She called Terry. I want an estimate for repairing the ventilation and opening the wall safely. That won't be cheap. I know. Do you want the estimate before I order anything? Yes. Good. I'm not promising the work. I didn't think you were. When can you price it? I need to measure the fan housing and check which refractory brick Raymond used. Tomorrow morning. Betty wrote the appointment in her notebook. At 4, Lauren called. Betty let it ring while she carried a folding chair into the main workroom. She was tired of conducting every conversation from Raymond's desk as if she were borrowing his authority. Wanda arrived at 5, carrying a leather case and a paper bag of food. I brought soup, she said. The cafe gave me enough for 2. She was 73, tall and silver-haired, with red-framed glasses and a dark wool coat. She stopped inside the main workroom and looked around slowly. I haven't been here since August. Were the wheels covered then? No. Raymond was working at the standing table. On the vessel? Yes. Betty removed the canvas from the nearest wheel. Dust rose in a thin sheet. Show me where. Wanda walked to the far end of the room. A broad plywood platform stood beneath another cover. She lifted one corner, then stopped. May I? Betty nodded. Beneath the canvas was an empty circular support reinforced with wooden braces. Dried coils of dark clay clung to its edges. A measuring stick lay beside it. Wanda ran one finger near the clay without touching it. This is where it stood. How do you know? Raymond built the platform for it. He complained for 10 minutes about the cost of plywood. They found a row of glaze tests on the windowsill. Most were ordinary tiles, but 3 larger pieces had been labeled "Final" in Raymond's handwriting. Their surfaces shifted from deep brown to a muted blue where the glaze thinned. Wanda held one near the window. This was the glaze. You're sure? I watched him mix it. Could he have used it on something else? He could have. Betty heard the care in the answer. Wanda examined the intake sheet and confirmed her handwriting. Then she looked at Raymond's calendar and the note about the loading wall. He never told me about this, she said. They entered the kiln room together. Betty unlocked the door, but didn't approach the wall until Wanda had put on a paper mask from Terry's toolbox. Wanda stood several feet from the seam. I can't tell what's behind it. Neither could Terry. But that brick wasn't arranged that way when I visited. Betty turned to her. You remember the wall? I remember the loading opening. Raymond was measuring whether the vessel would clear it. Did it? Barely. Was the vessel in this room then? No. It was still on the platform. Betty directed her flashlight across the darkened brick. So, the wall changed after you saw the vessel? Yes. And after Terry last serviced the kiln? Yes. Wanda stepped back into the workroom. That's all I can confirm. It was enough. Raymond had built the large, unfinished vessel. He had measured it against the kiln. He had later fired the kiln, then altered or sealed part of the loading wall. No one could say the vessel survived or remained inside. But the inconsistency was no longer a grieving widow's guess. They ate soup in the warmed office. Wanda wrote a short statement on the back of a copy of the intake sheet, recording only what she had personally seen and when. Betty placed it with the probate order. As Wanda prepared to leave, headlights swept across the office window. Eric's truck stopped near the kiln room. He got out without knocking and tried the side door. It was locked. He came around to the office with his phone in his hand. Lauren said Wanda was here, he said. Wanda looked at Betty. Betty opened the door, but remained in the doorway. She is. Eric looked past her at the papers on the desk. What did you find? I found information about work your father was doing. What work? We don't know yet. If it was Dad's, it belongs to the estate. The distribution order says the shed and all contents passed to me. That doesn't mean finished artwork. It says all contents. Eric's concern had arrived very quickly after years of disinterest. Betty could see him trying to turn uncertainty into a category he might control. I've got a developer willing to walk the parcel tomorrow, he said. You need the tax money. Don't make this harder because Wanda found an old gallery form. The developer doesn't have permission to enter. Mom, be reasonable. No one enters without asking me. I'm asking now. No? Eric stared at her. He had expected resistance to soften once he stood in front of her. Betty took the kiln room key from her pocket and placed it on the chain around her neck. You can visit me, she said. You cannot inspect, list, show, or promise anything on this property. Eric looked toward the dark windows of the kiln room. For the first time, He was no longer treating the pottery as a burden Betty would eventually beg him to remove. He wanted access, and she had just denied it. Eric put his phone in his coat pocket. You wouldn't have any of this without Dad. Betty kept her hand on the office door. I know, and now you're acting like we're strangers. You tried a locked side door before you knocked. I thought this was still family property. It isn't. His jaw tightened. That's a convenient reading. It's the reading you gave me when you wanted the taxes to be mine. Wanda turned toward the desk and began closing her leather case. Eric noticed the movement. What did Dad make? He asked her. I don't know what he finished. You represented him for years. That doesn't let me see through brick. But you think something's there. I think Raymond was working. That's all I can confirm. Eric looked at the intake sheet on the desk. Betty moved between him and it without planning to. What's that? He asked. A record Wanda brought. I found it here, Betty said. It stays here. Eric's attention shifted from the paper to the key hanging around her neck. He could be patient when patience promised money. Betty had watched him wait through inspections, contract talks, and delayed payments. With family, he usually expected quicker results. Let me bring the developer tomorrow, he said. He'll give you a real number. If you don't like it, say no. I already said no. You said he couldn't enter. I'm asking permission, and I'm refusing it. Why? Because I'm not offering the property for sale. You can't pay the taxes. Betty felt Wanda listening behind her. The old embarrassment rose quickly. Eric had always been able to make private dependence sound like public evidence. That's my problem, Betty said. It becomes everybody's problem when you lose the parcel. Then let it become your problem when that happens. He stared at her. Betty rarely left a statement that sharp. Usually she would soften it, explain what she meant, and provide the other person with a graceful way out. This time she waited. Eric walked back to his truck. Before getting in, he called across the gravel. If there's artwork in there, don't sell it. Betty didn't answer. His truck lights crossed the windows as he turned around. Wanda waited until he reached the road. He'll call Lauren before he gets home, she said. He probably called her from the driveway. You know them. I know who they are when they want an answer. Wanda buttoned her coat. You should keep copies of every paper somewhere else. Do you think they'd take them? I think people can persuade themselves that taking a family paper isn't taking. Betty understood. She put the probate order, intake sheet, Wanda's statement, repair receipts, and Raymond's note into a large envelope. Wanda agreed to store photocopies at the gallery. That wasn't another solution. A copy couldn't open the wall or pay the taxes. It only meant Betty wouldn't have to prove a paper had existed if someone decided it belonged in a different folder. After Wanda left, Betty locked both doors and pushed the desk against the office door. The desk wasn't heavy enough to stop anyone. It was heavy enough to wake her. She slept until the sound of Terry's truck reached the gravel the next morning. He brought a folding workbench, 2 masonry braces, and a box of masks. I haven't agreed to open it, Betty said. These are for measuring. Good. You always inspect deliveries before saying hello. Raymond once ordered 12 cases of the wrong clay because he didn't. He said the supplier changed the label. The supplier did not change the label. Terry carried the equipment inside. He removed the fan housing while Betty held a light. The screws had rusted in place, and each one gave a dry squeal when it turned. Terry laid every piece on a cloth in order. The belt had been removed cleanly. It hadn't snapped. Why would Raymond take it off? Betty asked. To replace it, probably. It was worn. Then why didn't he? He may not have had the right size. They searched the vent cabinet. Behind a stack of filters, Betty found a cardboard sleeve marked with the fan model. It held a new belt. Terry examined it. This is the right one. He had the part. Yes. So why stop halfway? Terry looked toward the kiln wall. Maybe the vent wasn't the work he cared about finishing. That answer gave shape to the timeline without completing it. Raymond had obtained the belt, opened the fan housing, and then left the repair undone. Whatever he did next mattered more to him. Terry fitted the belt and turned the fan by hand. The blades moved evenly. The motor may still be good. Can we test it? Not on the old circuit. The electrician separated the office line. That doesn't help the vent. What would? A temporary protected connection, installed properly. Not an extension cord across the floor. Betty wrote that down. They moved to the kiln. Terry braced the outer frame, then used a narrow gauge to check the depth of the loose mortar joints. He didn't remove the darkened brick. Betty stood beside him and wrote each measurement. The seam ends below this course, he said. The rest of the loading wall appears original, meaning, if we open it, we may only need to remove the altered section. We might not have to dismantle the whole front. That's good. It is. How good? It could save several days and a lot of brick. He tested the steel frame again. The chamber still needs support. Once the first course comes out, there's no guessing. Each brick gets numbered, photographed, and removed in order. And if something shifts, we stop. And if it doesn't, we continue one course at a time. Betty looked at the straight seam. For the first time, opening it sounded like work people could actually perform, not a reckless idea born from grief. Terry measured the ventilation duct, masonry opening, and clearance around the kiln furniture. Then they sat in the office while he worked through costs. The fan motor is probably usable, he said. That helps. The electrical connection, new duct section, filters, masks, bracing, refractory mortar, replacement brick, and labor come to about $4,600. Betty kept her face still. That includes opening the altered section, if nothing unexpected happens, and putting it back. Closing it safely, yes. Restoring it exactly as Raymond had it, no. We don't yet know what he did. How long? Parts could take 2 weeks, maybe 3. Once everything is here, the wall itself takes several days. Betty turned to a clean page in her notebook. She had spent $1,291 since receiving the key. If she paid Terry's estimate, almost nothing would remain for food, water repairs, or the taxes. How much to begin? She asked. Half for materials. $2,300. Yes. When would the balance be due? After the chamber is safe and the altered section is open. She pressed her thumb into her palm until the joint eased. If I pay the deposit, order the parts. Terry didn't reach for the checkbook she had placed on the desk. Betty, the property tax deadline matters more than my schedule. I know? Then wait until you know how you'll pay both. If I wait 3 weeks to order parts, I lose 3 weeks. You could lose more than that. I could also sell the parcel without ever knowing what Raymond did. That may be the safer choice. Would you make it? He looked through the office window toward the kiln chimney. No, he said, but I'm not the one with the tax notice. Betty wrote the check for $2,300. Her hand shook slightly at the end of her signature. She waited before tearing it free so the paper wouldn't rip. Terry gave her a written work order listing the repairs and safety steps. The chamber would remain closed until ventilation, electrical protection, and bracing were complete. This doesn't buy certainty, he said. I'm not paying for certainty. What are you paying for? The right to find out without destroying anything. He folded the check and put it in his wallet. That I can provide. A car door closed outside. Lauren entered after knocking, but before Betty answered, she carried a slim folder. I called your phone. It was in my suitcase. Lauren saw Terry, the braces, and the open fan housing. What's happening? I'm repairing the ventilation, Betty said. Why? So the kiln wall can be inspected safely. Lauren looked at Terry. Did you find something? I found an altered section of masonry. Inside the kiln? In the loading wall. What's behind it? We don't know. Lauren placed the folder on the desk. I want to talk to Mom alone. Terry began packing his measuring tools. I need to make 2 calls from the truck. After he left, Lauren opened the folder. Inside was a typed purchase proposal. I can pay you $24,000 for the parcel, she said. I'll cover the overdue taxes at closing, and you'll receive the balance. Betty read the first page. Where would the money come from? I can borrow against the house, my old house, the house Dad wanted kept in the family. Betty turned to the second page. Lauren would take the pottery, kiln, tools, and all contents. Betty would have 30 days to remove her personal property. What happens after you buy it? We decide as a family. That means Eric brings his developer. It means you stop spending your savings on a mystery. Betty closed the folder. Did Eric tell you Wanda was here? Yes. And now the parcel is worth $6,000 more than the appraisal. I'm trying to give you a way out. Lauren believed that. She could imagine paying the taxes, putting a bed downstairs, and restoring the arrangement in which Betty depended on her. She couldn't see why her mother might prefer a cold office with her own lock. I'm not selling it, Betty said. You just paid someone, didn't you? Yes. How much? That's private. Your finances stopped being private when I had to sort the estate. You didn't have to. I let you. Lauren's eyes moved to the envelope of documents. Eric thinks anything Dad made should be divided. Eric thought everything here was broken yesterday. He's still Dad's son, and I'm still Raymond's widow. That doesn't erase us. No one is erasing you. I'm refusing your offer. Lauren picked up the folder, but didn't leave. What if there's nothing behind that wall? Then I'll know. And if there is, then I'll know that too. You can't keep making decisions that affect all of us. Betty opened the office door. This one affects me first. Lauren walked out without taking the coffee mug she had brought the previous morning. At her car, she turned and looked toward the kiln room. Betty watched her make the same calculation Eric had made. The shed had become interesting because Betty had stopped agreeing it was worthless. When Lauren drove away, Betty checked her bank balance. $3,442 remained. The roof was dry, the office was warm, and the parts needed to open the altered wall were being ordered. The useful result had made retreat more expensive. It had also told Lauren and Eric exactly where Betty intended to go next. The first parts arrived 4 days later. Terry brought them inside during a morning of wet snow. He set the new duct section on the work table, then placed 2 boxes of filters beside it. The protected connection will be finished this afternoon, he said. After that, we can test the motor. Betty had spent the waiting days cleaning without disturbing the kiln room. She washed shelves with heated bottled water, swept clay dust into sealed bags, and uncovered one pottery wheel at a time. The work took longer than she remembered. Her right hand wouldn't close fully in the mornings. She soaked it in warm water, wrapped the worst joint with cloth tape, and continued. By evening, pain traveled into her wrist. Terry noticed the tape. You don't have to clear the room for me. I'm not clearing it for you. Then take smaller sections. I am taking smaller sections. You moved that shelf. It had wheels. One wheel is missing, I noticed. He knew better than to argue further. Instead, he moved the next shelf before she could reach it. The electrical connection was ready by 3. Terry installed the new belt, checked the fan blades, and replaced the housing. Then he stood near the switch while Betty waited beside the office door. If it makes a grinding sound, I shut it down, he said. What if it smells hot? I shut it down. What if it works? We let it run for 5 minutes. He pressed the switch. The fan started with a low mechanical hum. Air moved through the hood and out the new duct. Betty felt the pull against a strip of tissue Terry held near the intake. For nearly a minute, nothing changed. Then the motor made a hard clicking sound. Terry switched it off. A thin thread of smoke rose from the housing. Betty opened the outside door while he disconnected the power. The smoke cleared quickly, leaving the sharp smell of burned insulation. The winding failed, he said. You thought the motor was good. I thought it might be. Can it be repaired? Not for less than replacement. How much? I need to check. Betty looked at the new belt hanging motionless around the pulley. The vent had been one working motor away from safety. Now it was another bill. Terry called 2 suppliers from his truck. The correct replacement was no longer manufactured. A newer motor would fit only with an adapter plate and a different control. $980, he said when he returned. That includes the plate and installation. Betty sat at Raymond's desk. I don't have it. I can return the unopened filters and part of the duct. We need those. We need the motor too. How long can the supplier hold it? Until tomorrow afternoon. Betty opened her checkbook, though she already knew the balance. The remaining money had to cover food, water, the final payment for Terry's work, and whatever happened next. Don't order it yet, she said. Terry nodded. That's the right decision. She disliked hearing that. The right decision still left the kiln sealed and the ordered parts useless. After he left, Betty drove to North Main Street. Lauren's car wasn't there. Betty used the house key she had kept on her own ring. It still worked. Inside, the rooms looked both familiar and rearranged. Lauren had removed the funeral flowers. 2 framed photographs had moved from the sideboard to the mantel. A stack of paint samples lay on the dining table. Betty went upstairs. Her clothes remained in the bedroom closet, but boxes had been placed along one wall. Someone had written "Donate" on the largest one. She opened it. Inside were Raymond's work shirts, 3 pairs of his trousers, and the brown shoes he wore to gallery openings. His clay-stained jacket had been folded at the bottom. Betty removed the jacket and laid it on the bed. She didn't call Lauren. The box itself was an answer. Her daughter had begun deciding which parts of Raymond's life the house could keep. Betty took a small walnut jewelry case from the dresser. It held her wedding ring, a gold bracelet Raymond gave her after their 25th anniversary, pearl earrings, 2 brooches, and a thin gold chain that had belonged to her mother. She left the wedding ring on her hand. She placed the other pieces into a cloth bag. Then she packed Raymond's jacket, his measuring calipers from the hall cabinet, and the photograph albums Lauren had not yet sorted. She carried everything to the car in 3 trips. On the last trip, Lauren pulled into the driveway. She got out and looked at the cloth bag in Betty's hand. "What are you doing here, collecting my things? You don't have to sneak in. I use my key. You could have called. You would have asked why. I'm asking now." Betty opened the car door and placed the bag on the passenger seat. "I need money for the ventilation system." Lauren stared at her. "You're selling jewelry?" "Yes." "Mom, stop this. The motor failed. That's the building telling you what it is. It's a failed motor. You're spending the last money you have to open a wall. I'm spending money to make the kiln room safe. For what? To find out what Raymond finished." Lauren looked toward the house. A neighbor was bringing in trash bins across the street, and she didn't want the conversation carrying. What if Dad didn't finish anything? Then the room still needs safe ventilation before anyone uses the kiln. No one is going to use it. Betty looked at her daughter. Lauren had said it without cruelty. In her mind, Raymond's death had ended the purpose of the pottery. The building was an empty remainder, useful only if converted into money. "I used it," Betty said. "You kept the books. I did more than that. I didn't mean you never came out there. I mixed glazes when your father's shoulder was injured. I packed orders. I trained him to record deposits instead of carrying checks in his shirt pocket. I scheduled firings, bought clay, and dealt with customers when a set came out wrong. That was a long time ago. It was my life." Lauren's expression softened, which hurt more than her resistance. "I know you miss him. This isn't about missing him. Then what is it about?" Betty had no short answer yet. Lauren stepped closer. "Come inside. We'll call the jeweler and tell him you changed your mind." "I haven't called anyone." "Good. I'm still going. Those pieces are family things. They're mine. You might want to give them to someone later." "You mean you. I mean family." Betty closed the car door. "When you and Eric divided the house and money, you called it practical. Now that I'm deciding what to do with my own bracelet, it becomes family. That isn't fair." "No, it isn't." Lauren looked at the packed jacket in the back seat. "I was going to ask before donating Dad's clothes. You wrote on the box. That doesn't mean I'd taken it anywhere." Betty believed her. Lauren probably would have called. She would have asked whether Betty wanted any of Raymond's shirts, then treated the rest as hers to decide. "I took the jacket," Betty said. "The other clothes are still there. Where are you putting all this?" "At the Pottery. That office can't become a storage room. It can become whatever I need it to become." Lauren folded her arms against the cold. "You're choosing that building over us." "No. I'm choosing something without asking you to approve it." To Lauren, the difference felt very small. To Betty, it had become the whole matter. She drove away before either of them could repeat themselves. The jewelry shop stood on the main road in Ephraim. Betty sat across from the owner while he tested the metal and weighed each piece. He offered $2,760. The pearls had little resale value. He suggested she keep them. Betty kept the pearls and her mother's chain. She sold the bracelet, both brooches, and 1 pair of gold earrings. The owner counted the money onto a felt pad. "You're sure about the anniversary bracelet?" he asked. "Yes." She remembered Raymond fastening it around her wrist in a restaurant parking lot because he had forgotten to bring it inside. The clasp had always been difficult. On good days, Betty could close it herself. On bad days, it remained in the box. She placed the cash in an envelope. Outside, she sat in the car and rested both hands on the steering wheel. The pale strip where the bracelet had covered her wrist was still visible. She didn't cry. She started the engine and called Terry. "Order the motor. You found the money?" "Yes." "All right, I'll order it." "When can we continue?" 3 days of shipping holds. I'll be ready." Back at the Pottery, she put Raymond's jacket on a hook beside his aprons. She stored the albums in the office cabinet, then carried the calipers to the work table. The platform Wanda had identified still stood at the far end. Betty measured its width. Then she measured the kiln's original loading opening. The platform was wider by nearly 4 inches. She measured again. Terry arrived near dusk to collect a part number he had left behind. Betty showed him the measurements. How did he load something wider than the opening? She asked. He couldn't. Wanda saw him measuring it. He could have trimmed the piece before it dried. The clay marks on the platform reach almost to the edge. Terry examined the wooden braces beneath the platform. Then he walked to the kiln room and held the calipers against the altered brick. The sealed section extended beyond the original loading edges. He widened the opening, Terry said. Before the firing, he would have to. And then, Terry shone his flashlight across the mortar. The outer joints bore shallow marks from a flat tool. The inner edges, visible through the narrow seam, were dark and rough. He closed it from this side, he said. After the firing, the outer mortar hasn't been heat-cured like the brick behind it. Yes. It appears he sealed the opening after the kiln cooled. That changed what they knew. Raymond hadn't merely repaired a crack. He had widened the kiln to load something unusually large, fired it, and then closed the chamber from the outside. Betty touched the key at her neck. Until that moment, she had been trying to discover whether Raymond left something worth saving. That goal was no longer enough. Even if the firing had failed, even if the chamber held only broken clay, the pottery contained work they had shared and choices she had allowed others to dismiss. "I'm not selling the parcel," she said. Terry looked at her. "Even if the chamber is empty?" "Even then." "What about the taxes?" "I'll find a way to address them." "And after the wall is open?" Betty looked through the workroom. One safe office, 2 covered wheels, shelves of ordinary tools, and a platform built for a vessel no one had seen finished. "I'm going to make this place useful again," she said. "Finding what Raymond left is only the first job." Terry glanced toward the office where the heater hummed beside the cot. "Useful as what?" "A pottery." "You planning to start throwing again?" "I'm planning to make the room capable of it. That wasn't my question." "I know." Betty walked to the wheel nearest the windows. Its canvas cover had protected it from most of the roof dust. She lifted the pedal with her foot and checked the cord. "This one was yours," she said. Terry looked at the dark stain on the wooden seat. "Raymond's after I left. He kept your height marks on the legs." Terry crouched. 3 pencil lines crossed the front legs. The lowest had faded. The middle line carried his initials. Raymond had later raised the seat another inch. "I haven't thrown anything in years," Terry said. "You still looked at the wheel before you looked at the kiln. That's because it was in my way. It's against the wall." He ran a thumb over the edge of the seat. "What are you asking? Would you lease a bench?" He laughed once, then realized she was serious. "You don't have water. I will. You don't have a safe workroom circuit. The electrician can finish that when she connects the motor. The kiln isn't operating. I know. You've told me several times. What would I be leasing? A bench, storage space, access to a wheel, and later, if it passes inspection, scheduled kiln use. You'd also maintain the kiln under a separate agreement." Terry stood. "You've been thinking about this since yesterday." "That's not long. It's longer than Lauren gave me to understand the family agreement." He didn't answer that. Betty returned to the office and opened her notebook. She had listed monthly expenses beside the remaining repair costs. The numbers didn't work yet, but they were at least her numbers. "I can charge $250 a month for one bench," she said. "You pay for your clay. Firings are separate because power costs money. If the kiln isn't approved, you can end the lease. $250 is low. The roof still leaks in one place. It doesn't leak over that bench. Then don't talk me upward." He pulled out the desk chair and sat. "I'd need evening access. You'd have your own outside key. Not the kiln room key, fair. And no firing without both of us present until the maintenance schedule is established. Also fair. You don't get free rent for repairing what I hire you to repair. I wasn't asking. You were thinking it. I was thinking about whether my back can still handle a wheel." Betty looked at his boots. "Can it?" "For an hour at a time." "So can mine." Terry smiled. "Write the agreement." She used the old typewriter stored beneath Raymond's desk. The ribbon had dried, but the keys still worked. She drafted the terms by hand instead, using plain language. 1 bench, 1 wheel, shared sink, separate clay storage, monthly rent, kiln maintenance duties and firing charges to be agreed after inspection. Terry read every line. "You should include notice," he said. "How much?" 30 days for either of us." Betty added it. He signed and wrote a check for the first month. The amount wouldn't save the parcel. It was enough to prove the pottery could earn something without being sold. The next morning, the replacement motor arrived. The electrician fitted the adapter plate while Terry reassembled the duct. Betty stayed out of the way until they needed someone to hold the housing level. Her taped fingers slipped once. Terry took the weight. Use both hands. Use your palms, not your fingers. She adjusted her grip. That worked. When the connection was finished, the fan started cleanly. The new motor sounded quieter than the old one. Terry tested the draw at the hood, the outside vent, and the kiln opening. Air moved in the correct direction. He let it run for 20 minutes. No heat, he said, touching the housing. No vibration. Betty wrote the test time in her notebook. The electrician restored 2 workroom circuits and replaced the loose outlet near the sink. She left the wheel circuits off until Terry could inspect the cords. The bill used most of the jewelry money. Betty paid it without telling Lauren. That afternoon, a plumber replaced the outdoor water valve and pressure tested the lines. One connection beneath the wash sink leaked, but the pipe itself had not split. He replaced the fitting. When the street valve opened, water moved through the building with a long groan. Rust-colored liquid sputtered from the workroom tap, then ran clear. Betty held her hand beneath it. Cold water filled her palm. The washroom toilet worked after 2 attempts. The small water heater did not. That repair would wait. She had spent another $730. In return, the building had safe lights, ventilation, a working sink, and a functioning toilet. The office still wasn't approved as a residence. Betty didn't pretend otherwise. She slept there because it was dry, warm, and hers. In the mornings, she washed at the sink and heated water for coffee. At night, she locked the doors herself. Wanda brought 2 folding lamps from the gallery. She also brought empty archive boxes for Raymond's records. "I'm not cataloging the final work," she said. "We don't know if there is one. We're cataloging the room that I can help with." Betty assigned numbers to the wheels, shelves, tools, and kiln furniture. Wanda photographed each item. Terry identified equipment Betty couldn't name. Most of it had little resale value. Clay traps, bats, trimming tools, glazed sieves, and worn stools were useful because they belonged in a working pottery, not because anyone would pay much for them. Betty found her old ledger cabinet behind a stack of packing boxes. The lower drawer had jammed. She and Terry eased it open with wooden shims. Inside were decades of order books. Betty recognized her handwriting before she opened the first one. Every sale had a date, customer, item, price, deposit, and delivery status. Red marks showed late payments. Blue marks showed work Raymond had remade after damage. Wanda turned one page. "You kept all this?" Raymond couldn't remember who paid deposits. He told galleries you remembered everything. He told me the notebooks made the room look untidy. Terry lifted a second ledger. "This is why clay always arrived before we ran out. I ordered it. I thought Raymond did. He told me what body he wanted. I worked out how much and when." Terry looked across the room as if another part of the building had changed. "I owe you several thank yous from 1984. You can pay rent on time. I will." That afternoon, Betty cleaned the wheel assigned to his bench. Terry replaced its cracked cord and checked the bearings. The pedal stuck halfway down. He removed the cover and found dried clay packed around the linkage. Betty sat on a low stool and picked it free with a wooden tool. Her fingers hurt, but the work required patience more than force. Terry adjusted the spring. When he pressed the pedal again, the wheel head turned. It began unevenly, then settled into a steady motion. The sound traveled through the workroom. Betty knew it immediately. A pottery wheel didn't sound like a kiln or a fan. It made a soft, mechanical whir beneath the scrape of the belt. Raymond used to start one before breakfast and leave muddy footprints across the floor. Terry placed a bucket beside the bench. "I'll bring clay tomorrow. You're beginning before the kiln opens. I can make test pieces and have them fired somewhere else. Then you're paying rent for a real bench." That was the agreement. Betty went to the road and straightened the old Doyle pottery sign. She couldn't repair the broken chain alone, so Terry brought a ladder and a short length of new chain. Betty held the ladder while he attached it. The sign hung level for the first time in years. They didn't repaint it. The faded letters still carried Raymond's brush marks. Betty washed the surface with a sponge until the name could be read clearly from North Main Street. 2 days later, Terry brought a 25-pound bag of clay. He cut off a small piece, wedged it on the standing table, and sat at the wheel. Betty stayed near the sink. His first attempt leaned badly. He stopped it, laughed, and folded the clay back into itself. Don't watch. You're using my electricity. Then watch quietly. The second piece rose into a low cylinder. Terry's hands remembered more than his back did. After several minutes, he stopped the wheel and cut the clay free. It was only a test cup, thick at the base and uneven near the rim. It was also the first new piece made in the room since Raymond's death. Terry placed it on a board and wrote the date beneath it. A vehicle slowed on North Main Street. Eric's truck turned into the drive. Betty dried her hands and walked outside before he reached the door. He looked at the repaired sign, the vent duct, and the lighted workroom windows. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Working." "With Terry?" "He leases a bench." Eric stared through the window. Terry was cleaning the wheel. The new cup sat beside him. "You're running a business?" "I'm preparing one." "Does Lauren know?" "She isn't my business partner." Eric took out his phone and photographed the exterior. Betty stepped between him and the office door. "Why are you taking pictures?" "To show what's changed." "Show whom?" The developer asked whether the building was occupied. "He isn't entering. I didn't say he was." "You told him about the repairs. He can see the sign from the road." Eric walked toward the kiln room and photographed the new vent. Betty followed. "Stop taking pictures. It's not illegal to photograph a building. It's rude to photograph your mother's home after she asks you to stop." He lowered the phone at the word home. "This isn't a home," he said. "It's a workshop with a cot. It's becoming both. Do you have permission for that?" "I have plans for it. That's not what I asked." He looked through the kiln room window, but the angle revealed only stacked shelves and brick. "You're putting money into the parcel," he said. "You're leasing space. You're changing how it's used. If anything goes wrong, that affects the sale. There is no sale. There may have to be. The county gave me a deadline, not you." Eric put the phone away. He had arrived expecting to find his mother cold, tired, and ready to reconsider. Instead, he found running water, repaired wiring, a tenant, and a pottery wheel turning behind a readable sign. The progress didn't reassure him. It gave him a clearer target. He returned to his truck without asking to come inside. Betty watched him drive toward North Main Street. Then she checked the outside locks, photographed every repaired area herself, and placed copies of Terry's lease and all paid invoices in the envelope Wanda kept at the gallery. The first call came before breakfast. Terry stood outside the kiln room with his phone in one hand. "Eric called me last night." Betty poured hot water into her coffee mug. "What did he want?" "He said the estate may claim anything Raymond made." "What did you tell him?" "That I don't decide ownership." "Did he ask what's behind the wall?" "He asked whether I had opened it." "I said no." "Did you tell him when we planned to?" "No." Betty set down the kettle. Terry continued. "I can install the braces and finish the safety work. I can't remove the first brick until this is settled. The order says the shed and all contents are mine. I've read the line. Then what isn't settled? Whether the altered chamber counts as part of the shed, and whether something made before Raymond died remained a separate estate asset." That sounds like Eric talking. It sounds like a question I don't want answered after I've moved something. Betty folded her arms. "I paid you for safe work, not blind work. You think I'm trying to take something that belongs to my children? No. I think Eric wants enough uncertainty to stop us, and you're letting him. I'm requiring proof before I disturb the chamber. I'd require it from him too." Betty wanted to tell him the probate order was proof. She also knew that Terry's care was the reason she trusted him with Raymond's kiln. What kind of proof? A written answer from whoever handled the distribution. "I'm not asking Lauren. Lauren administered it. She doesn't own the court order." Betty looked toward the kiln room. The new ventilation motor was ready. The braces stood folded beside the wall. A single phone call had stopped the work without touching either. "How much delay?" she asked. "That depends on how quickly you get an answer. The taxes are due in 34 days. "I know. Does Eric?" "I didn't tell him. He knows the original deadline." Terry put his phone away. "I'll finish the vent test today. After that, I wait." The second call came from Wanda. "Eric contacted me too," she said. "He asked whether I intended to sell any work belonging to the Doyle estate." "What did you say?" "That I haven't seen a finished work. He wants everyone frightened of touching it. He wants everyone to recognize there may be a dispute. There isn't a dispute. There's an order. Then get that confirmed before the chamber opens." Betty rubbed her forehead. Are you refusing to come? I'll come as your friend. I won't examine, move, offer, or arrange anything until ownership is clear. You wrote a statement about what I saw. I stand by it. But you won't stand in the kiln room. I won't let Eric later say my financial interest pushed you to remove estate property. Betty understood the concern. She still felt abandoned by it. Everyone was willing to call the pottery worthless, she said. The moment it may contain something, I have to prove I'm not stealing. Yes, Wanda said quietly. That is what's happening. The plainness of it stopped Betty from arguing. Keep the copies safe, she said. I will. Betty ended the call and returned to the workroom. Terry had started the vent fan. A strip of tissue pulled steadily toward the hood. The repair worked exactly as intended, but the sealed wall remained beyond it. At noon, Lauren arrived in a rented cargo van. She had called twice. Betty hadn't answered because the vent test was running. The van stopped beside the office. Lauren opened the rear doors. Inside were boxes, 2 lamps, a narrow dresser, Betty's sewing basket, and the upholstered chair from the North Main Street bedroom. Betty stood on the gravel. What is this? Your things? All of them? The things that are clearly yours. Betty looked at the boxes. Each had been labeled in Lauren's handwriting. Clothes, linens, photographs, kitchen. You packed my kitchen things? The blue dishes were your mother's. I thought you'd want them. I do. I brought the small table too. It's behind the dresser. Betty felt the cold through her sweater. Why today? You said this is your home. So you emptied my room. I need to know what space I have. We're painting upstairs next week. You could have called before packing. I did call. Today. Lauren closed one van door. You came into the house without telling me. I still had a key. And you took Dad's things. I took his jacket and calipers. I told you that. You also took albums. They're our albums. They're family property. Betty looked at her daughter. Is that why you brought them back? I brought your belongings because you've made a decision. No. You brought them because you want that decision to hurt. Lauren flinched. That isn't fair. Then tell me I can still come home. Lauren looked toward the pottery windows. You said this is home. Answer me. The wind lifted the edge of a cardboard box inside the van. Lauren had planned to be firm. She believed boundaries were healthy when she set them. She hadn't expected her mother to name the choice so directly. You can visit, she said. Of course you can visit. Can I sleep in the downstairs room? We need to use that space. For what? That's not the point. It is to me. Lauren drew her coat closed at the throat. You can't reject every practical solution, spend your money here, call this your home, and still expect me to keep a room ready. There was never a room ready. We were going to make one. When? I don't know. Betty nodded. Lauren reached into her pocket. I need the house key. The request was reasonable. Lauren owned the house now. That didn't stop it from feeling like a final lock turning. Betty removed the key from her ring. It was the same brass key she had carried for 28 years. The teeth had worn smooth near the tip. She placed it in Lauren's palm. Thank you, Lauren said. Betty nearly laughed at the politeness. Did Eric ask you to do this? No. Did he ask you to call Terry and Wanda? He told them there's an ownership question. He created the question. He's trying to protect Dad's work, from me, from being sold before the estate is closed. The distribution order has already been entered. My administrator work isn't finished. Because you want every receipt arranged. Because that's my responsibility. Lauren put the key in her pocket. If there's a piece in the kiln, let us deal with it together. What does together mean? We open it with everyone present. We have it valued. If it belongs to the estate, it's divided properly. And if it belongs to me, then we discuss what Dad would have wanted. Betty understood the offer. Even if she proved ownership, Lauren still expected a family decision. What do you want me to do now? Betty asked. Pause the work. Accept my offer for the parcel. If something is found later, we can handle it separately. You want me to sell you the building before we open the chamber. I want to stop you from losing everything. You also want the key. To the kiln? To the decision. Lauren looked past Betty toward the repaired sign. You didn't used to speak to me this way. I didn't used to ask what you meant. That's cruel. It isn't meant to be. Terry came outside. He had heard enough to understand why the van was there. We can unload the boxes, he said. Lauren glanced at him. This is a family conversation. He's my tenant. That doesn't make him family. No, Betty said. It makes him someone who asked before entering. Lauren stepped back as if Betty had raised her voice. She hadn't. They unloaded in silence. The dresser fit beside the office cot. The small table went beneath the window. Betty's chair occupied the corner where the heater had stood, so Terry moved the heater nearer the desk. Lauren carried the final box inside. It contained framed photographs and a covered casserole dish. "I made chicken and rice," she said. "It should last a few days." Betty accepted the dish. "Thank you." Lauren waited, perhaps hoping the gratitude would reopen something. Betty didn't know how to do that without surrendering the decision. She didn't want to punish her daughter, but she could no longer purchase closeness with obedience. "I'll let you know when the ownership language is confirmed," she said. "You're still opening it?" "Yes. Even if Eric files a claim, if he files one, I'll answer it. You can't afford that. I can't afford to let fear make every decision." Lauren left in the empty van. Betty watched it disappear beyond the sign. Then she returned to the office and opened the box marked kitchen. Her mother's blue dishes were wrapped in towels. Lauren had packed them carefully. Not one was broken. That made the loss harder to simplify. Her daughter could protect a plate while taking away a key. Care and control had lived together in the family for years. Terry stood in the doorway. "I'm sorry. You didn't pack the van. I stopped the work." "You stopped because you needed proof." "Yes. Then help me get it." He considered that. "I can list every physical fact about the chamber and every step we plan to take. You bring the distribution order. Wanda brings the intake record. Then whoever handled the probate can answer one narrow question: whether the shed's contents are mine, and whether opening the altered loading wall changes that." Betty took out her notebook. "When the answer comes, how soon can we begin?" "Immediately. The vent is ready, the braces are ready, the materials are here. How many days to remove the wall? If it behaves, 3, and if it doesn't, we stop." She wrote the schedule beneath the tax deadline. The casserole warmed in a small oven Terry brought from home. Betty ate at her own table from one of the blue dishes. Across the room, the North Main Street house key was gone from her ring. Only the office key and kiln room key remained. She put the empty dish in the sink, turned on the repaired tap, and washed it. Then she called the probate office that had prepared the distribution order. "I need a written clarification," she said. "After I receive it, we're opening the kiln." The woman who answered asked for the case number. Betty read it from the order. "You're listed as a distributee," the woman said. "Lauren Riley is the administrator. She's also my daughter. That doesn't change the file." "No, I suppose it doesn't." The woman explained that the attorney who prepared the final distribution could review the wording. Because Lauren remained the administrator, she would receive notice of any written clarification. "How long will that take?" Betty asked. "If the attorney has everything today, perhaps 2 business days. I have 34 days before the property taxes are due. The tax office is separate." "I understand." Betty sent copies from Wanda's gallery because the Pottery had no scanner. She included the full order, the property description, Raymond's kiln note, Terry's work order, and photographs showing the altered wall. She didn't send Wanda's estimate because there was no estimate. She didn't claim the chamber held artwork. She asked one question only. If an item had remained inside the kiln when the shed and all contents were distributed solely to Betty, who owned it after the order? Lauren called before Betty returned from the gallery. "You contacted the probate attorney without me. I contacted the office that issued the papers. I'm the administrator. You're being notified. That isn't the same as speaking to me first. I'm not asking you to interpret an order that benefits you if I'm wrong." Lauren took a moment before responding. "The house passing to me has nothing to do with the kiln. It has everything to do with why I need a clear answer. Eric is going to think you're preparing to sell something. Eric already thinks that. Are you? There is nothing to sell until we know what's there. That wasn't my question. It's my answer." The attorney scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon. Betty asked Lauren and Eric to attend. She also asked Terry to come because he could explain what opening the chamber required. Wanda offered to accompany Betty. "Not inside the meeting," Betty said. "You have a financial interest if a finished piece exists. I also have 73 years of experience recognizing when someone needs another chair beside her. I know. Wait at the gallery." Wanda studied her over the red frames of her glasses. "You don't have to prove independence by sitting alone. I won't be alone. My children will be there. That's what concerns me." Betty smiled despite herself. "Keep your phone on." The meeting took place in a small office near the courthouse. The probate attorney had arranged 4 chairs around a round table. He placed the order between them. Lauren arrived first with her administrator folder. Eric came 2 minutes late and remained standing until the attorney asked him to sit. Terry carried no tools. He looked uncomfortable in a room without something mechanical to examine. The attorney began with the property description. The order distributed the rear parcel, the Doyle Pottery shed, its fixtures, equipment, tools, materials, and all contents solely to Betty Doyle. Eric leaned forward. Artwork isn't equipment or material. No, the attorney said. It would be a content. If it was Dad's artwork, it was part of his personal estate. It was part of his estate before distribution. The order distributed it according to the language entered, but nobody knew it existed. We don't know that it exists now. That's not the point. It is legally important. Lauren opened her folder. The inventory valued the parcel and building at $18,000. It didn't list finished ceramic work. Correct, the attorney said. So, if a valuable piece was missed, wouldn't we amend the inventory? An omitted asset can require an amended inventory. That does not automatically change who received it. Here, the order expressly conveyed all contents of a named property. Eric looked at Betty. She hid it. Betty kept both hands on her notebook. I didn't know the wall was altered until Terry inspected it. You knew Dad was working. Not until I found the intake sheet. Lauren spoke before Eric could answer. If there is a piece, Dad made it before he died. Why would its location decide which family member gets it? Because the family agreement used location to distribute the contents, the attorney said. The house passed with its ordinary contents to you. The pottery passed with its contents to Betty. Eric frowned. That would mean, if Dad left a bowl on the kitchen table, Lauren owns it. Unless the order excluded the bowl or assigned it elsewhere, yes. That's ridiculous. It may feel imprecise. It's still what was signed. Betty looked at Lauren. Her daughter had used the same language to take the furniture, dishes, and everything Raymond left in the North Main Street house. Now that the wording ran in Betty's direction, it seemed careless. The attorney turned to Terry. Can the chamber be opened without removing anything from the property? Yes. We'll number and remove only the altered brick. Anything inside remains where it is until it's examined. Has anyone looked inside? No. Do you know what's there? No. Did you perform the alteration? No. The mortar and heat marks indicate Raymond closed the widened loading section after a firing. That's all I can say. The attorney made a note. Eric spoke more quietly. What if the piece was only stored in the kiln? That doesn't mean Dad meant Mom to have it. The order controls ownership. Intention may help explain facts, but this office cannot invent an exception that the signed agreement and final order don't contain. Betty felt no triumph. The words were too close to the language Lauren and Eric had once used with her. The agreement was signed. The order was entered. Practical matters had consequences. Can Eric stop the opening? Betty asked. He can seek court relief if he believes he has a valid basis. I can't advise him. Nothing in this order prohibits you from inspecting your own property. And if an item has remained inside since before distribution, under the order as written, it passed to you with the other contents. The answer removed the uncertainty Terry required. It didn't open the wall, authenticate anything, or pay the taxes. The attorney signed a short clarification restating the scope of the order. He charged Betty $400 for the review and meeting. She wrote another check. Outside, Eric walked ahead without waiting. Lauren remained on the courthouse steps. You could still agree to share it, she said. Share what? Whatever Dad made. We haven't found anything. If you wait until after, it'll look like money changed your mind. I'm not promising away something before I know it exists. Lauren held the administrator folder against her chest. You heard what he said. You own the contents because of wording nobody thought about. You thought about it when the contents were broken shelves and dried clay. That doesn't mean Dad wanted one person to have his final work. No, it doesn't. Lauren seemed surprised by the agreement. Betty continued. If there is a final work, we'll look for what Raymond intended. But I won't begin by assuming his intention was that you and Eric control it. That's not what I'm asking. You're asking me to agree before the wall opens. I'm asking you to remember we're your children. I remember every day. Then act like it. Betty took the kiln key from beneath her coat. I'm inviting you both to be there. Lauren looked at the key. When? As soon as Terry schedules it. You'll let us inside? To witness, not to direct. And Wanda? She'll be there. Of course she will. I'm also asking her to bring a ceramics conservator. If something survived, no one touches it until it's safe. Lauren's expression hardened. You've arranged all of this. I'm arranging it now. If you use that order against us, things won't go back to normal. The warning was honest. Lauren had stopped pretending the disagreement concerned only taxes or masonry. Betty looked across the street at the courthouse lawn. Damp snow remained beneath a bare tree. Normal left, before I received the shed key, she said. Lauren walked away. Terry joined Betty at the bottom of the steps. The clarification is enough for me, he said. Would you have stopped permanently without it? Yes, I'm glad you told me. You didn't seem glad yesterday. I wasn't. He accepted that. Back at the gallery, Wanda read the clarification. We could open the chamber without telling them the date, she said. It would be calmer. It would also prove every suspicion Eric has invented. He may interfere. Then he leaves. You're willing to do that? I'm willing to set the rule before he arrives. Wanda removed her glasses and cleaned them with a cloth. There's another option. If anything is found, I can document it privately. Lauren and Eric don't need to see it until ownership and condition are established. No, why not? Because they'll say I hid the condition, the tablet, the marks, or whatever else might be there. You don't know there's a tablet. I mean any object, any evidence. Wanda replaced her glasses. You're giving them a chance to hurt you in person. I'm giving them a chance to see the same thing I see. That is kinder than necessary. It isn't kindness. It's a clean record. Betty could have excluded them. She could have let Eric imagine the opening, then shown him only what remained after professionals finished. That would have been easier. It would also repeat the family habit of making decisions first, and informing the affected person later. She wouldn't use ownership to make them feel as powerless as they had made her feel. Wanda agreed to bring one conservator. The conservator would examine any ceramic object in place before movement. She would compare clay body, glaze, tool marks, kiln residue, and heat effects. She would not assign ownership or value. Terry scheduled the first brick removal for Friday morning. On Thursday, he installed the braces and marked each altered course with removable chalk. Betty cleared the kiln room, leaving every piece of kiln furniture in its original position. Wanda set 2 cameras on fixed stands so the opening could be recorded without anyone holding a phone over Terry's shoulder. Betty wrote the rules on a sheet of paper and taped it to the kiln room door. Only Terry would remove brick. The conservator would direct any movement of ceramic work. Wanda would document. Lauren and Eric could observe. No one would touch, claim, remove, or offer anything until the examination was complete. She sent the same rules to both children. Eric replied with one sentence. I'll be there, but I agree to nothing. Lauren replied 10 minutes later. I'll come. At dusk, Betty paid the remaining balance on Terry's safety work. The payment left her with less than enough for the taxes and no easy reserve. She placed the probate clarification beside Raymond's note and locked the office drawer. Using the order would not restore the house key or make her children trust her choices. It might permanently end the version of family in which Betty kept everyone close by yielding first. She switched off the workroom lights, checked the new vent, and locked the kiln room. In the morning, she would open the door to everyone at the same time. By 8, Betty had opened the outside doors and started the vent. Terry checked the braces twice. Wanda adjusted the cameras without speaking. The conservator placed padded blankets, a rolling platform, lights, measuring tools, and a small examination case near the workroom door. Lauren arrived alone. She read the rules taped to the kiln room door and entered the office without comment. Eric came last. He carried a folder and handed copies of a written objection to Betty, Terry, and Wanda. I'm stating in advance that I consider any work by Dad an undivided estate asset, he said. Nobody can claim I agreed just because I'm here. The conservator declined her copy. I'm examining ceramic material and condition. I don't determine ownership. Eric offered the paper to Terry. Terry folded it once and put it on a shelf. Lauren stood near the office table. If there's a finished piece, the reasonable thing is a family auction. We could all agree on a reserve. Betty looked at her. You're planning the sale before you know there's a piece. I'm saying what should happen if there is. What if the chamber is empty? Then we'll all have spent weeks arguing over nothing. Lauren wanted that possibility. An empty chamber would let everyone return to the practical story. A sick father, a worthless building, and a mother who had let grief carry her too far. Eric had committed to the opposite. He believed something valuable was inside, and that Betty had used a careless line in the distribution order to take it from him. Betty placed his objection beneath the probate clarification. "You've both been heard," she said. "Now Terry works." The first brick came free at 8:09. Terry photographed its position, marked it with chalk, and placed it on a numbered board. Fine gray dust pulled toward the vent hood. The new motor held steady. The second brick resisted. Terry worked mortar from the joint with a narrow hand tool. Betty stood near the doorway and read the numbers aloud, while Wanda checked the camera record. "Upper course, second from the left," Betty said. Wanda repeated it. Lauren sat in the workroom, where she could see through the open door. Eric stood until the conservator told him his movement was shaking one camera stand. He sat. Terry removed the altered wall one course at a time. Behind the outer brick was a thin gap, then a second layer darkened by heat. Raymond had placed refractory fiber along the edges. It had hardened but remained intact. "He planned the closure," Terry said. Eric leaned forward. "Can you see anything?" "No." The opening widened slowly. At the third course, Terry stopped and checked the brace pressure. He tightened one support by a quarter turn. Betty's hands ached from holding the notebook, so she placed it on a stand. She would have liked a task that required strength. Waiting made every minute feel borrowed. At 10, Terry removed a brick and remained still. "What is it?" Betty asked. "Kiln furniture." The conservator put on gloves and approached. Through the narrow opening, vertical posts stood in a close ring. Their surfaces were pale with kiln wash and firing residue. Curved shelves rested between them, forming a protective barrier around something deeper in the chamber. "Don't remove the posts yet," the conservator said. Terry shifted his light. A dark glazed surface appeared between two shelves. Wanda covered her mouth with one hand. Lauren stood. Eric moved toward the doorway. "Stay behind the line," Betty said. He stopped. The conservator examined the visible surface without touching it. She changed the angle of the light. A muted blue appeared beneath the brown, the same blue Raymond had developed on the test tiles. "It is ceramic," she said. "I can't assess the form or condition yet." Wanda stepped beside Betty. "That's the glaze." "You said it could have been used on something else," Betty replied. "Yes." Neither woman looked away from the opening. Terry removed the next course. The protective ring became clearer. Raymond had arranged posts and half shelves around a single large form. The kiln furniture carried the pressure of the closure, keeping the brick away from the object. When the opening reached the vessel's widest point, Terry paused. The piece stood a little over 3 feet high. Its body rose from a broad foot, narrowed through the middle, then opened into an uneven oval mouth. Deep brown glaze covered the lower half. Above it, blue moved across ridges left by Raymond's tools. The surface wasn't polished or delicate. It carried finger marks, trimmed lines, and one small place where the glaze had run and stopped before reaching the base. No crack crossed the body. The conservator directed more lights into the chamber. "There may be hairline damage we can't see," she said. "Nobody touches it." Wanda lowered her hand. He finished the rim. "You saw it before?" Lauren asked. "I saw the form before firing. The rim was still rough. He said Betty would make him correct it." Betty remembered that argument. Not this vessel, but dozens of bowls Raymond called expressive when their rims were simply uneven. "A person should be able to drink without cutting a lip," she used to tell him. "This wasn't made for drinking," he would say. A rim is still a promise. The vessel's upper edge curved inward, smooth and deliberate. Terry removed the final altered course. The chamber stood open. The conservator spent nearly an hour examining the vessel where Raymond had left it. She used magnification on the glaze, checked the foot through a mirror, and photographed the tool marks beneath the rim. She compared the clay visible at the foot with the dried coils on the platform. Their color, grit, and mineral flecks matched. Then she examined Raymond's test tiles. A handheld analyzer showed the same glaze elements and colorants as the vessel's surface. She found a distinctive hook trimming mark Wanda recognized from other signed pieces. "That supports Raymond's authorship," the conservator said. "The firing residue and protected positions support this kiln as the firing location." Eric opened his folder. "Supports isn't proves. It's the word responsible professionals use. Can you authenticate it? I can give a professional opinion after the object is removed and the base is examined. The vessel couldn't be lifted by its rim or narrow middle." Terry rolled the padded platform near the kiln. The conservator placed broad fabric supports beneath the body using long, flat guides. Betty saw that the platform was too low. Raise it 2 inches, she said. Terry checked. She's right. They added a rigid pad beneath the blankets. That brought the platform level with the kiln floor. Betty had packed Raymond's largest pieces for shipping. She knew the danger came when several people lifted at different speeds. One person calls the count, she said. Everyone stops if anyone says stop. The conservator looked at her. You call it. Terry took one support. The conservator took the other. Wanda steadied the platform. Betty kept both hands against the padded base, using her palms instead of her fingers. Lift on 3, she said. 1, 2, 3. The vessel moved less than an inch. Hold. They held. Forward. Slowly it crossed the kiln floor and settled onto the platform. Only when its full weight rested on the padding did Betty step back. Something remained inside the ring of kiln furniture. A small clay rectangle lay beneath the place where the vessel had stood. Its edges were darkened, and one corner carried the same blue glaze. Terry reached toward it, then stopped. The conservator used padded tongs to lift it onto an examination cloth. Words had been cut into the clay before firing. For Betty. This vessel is yours. Raymond. No one spoke. Betty put one hand against the kiln frame. The metal was cool. Raymond had not known exactly how the estate would be divided. He had known people could overlook a workshop, a kiln, and unfinished work. So he had placed his intention inside the same firing as the piece. Lauren read the words twice. Eric looked toward the probate clarification. That tablet could have been made separately, he said. The conservator turned it beneath the light. It was made separately. The question is whether it was fired separately. She examined the unglazed clay, the glazed corner, and the dark deposit on its underside. She compared it with residue from the kiln floor and the protected shadow at the vessel's foot. The same fine gray deposit lay across both objects. The blue glaze had pooled at the tablet's corner in the same way it pooled within the vessel's ridges. Tiny bubbles in both surfaces had collapsed under the same heat pattern. She checked the clay body under magnification. The mineral flecks matched the vessel's exposed foot and the coils from Raymond's platform. Then she fitted the tablet into a pale firing shadow on the kiln floor beneath the vessel. One edge aligned with a small run of glaze that had dripped from the vessel's base. This tablet sat here during the vessel's final firing, she said. The clay body, glaze behavior, kiln residue, and heat marks are consistent with one firing. In my professional opinion, Raymond Doyle made both and fired them together in this chamber. Eric's objection remained on the shelf. The conservator examined the vessel's base. Raymond's cut signature appeared beneath the firing residue. The date matched the year of his death. Wanda walked around the platform without crossing the conservator's working space. I've represented Raymond's work for 31 years, she said. This is his largest completed vessel. It also resolves the unfinished entry in my gallery record. Is it valuable? Lauren asked. Wanda looked at Betty before answering. Yes. How valuable? Eric asked. I won't recommend a public auction. Why not? Because this piece belongs with its firing record, test tiles, tablet, and documented chamber. Separating those for bidding would weaken the history Raymond preserved. Eric glanced at Betty. That sounds convenient. It's also my professional judgment. Wanda took a prepared acquisition form from her leather case. The object description remained blank because she hadn't known what they would find. She filled it in after the conservator completed the examination. Then she wrote the amount. I'm offering Betty $185,000 on behalf of the Oliver Gallery Permanent Collection, she said. The offer includes conservation, transport, and permanent display of the ownership tablet beside the vessel. Lauren gripped the back of her chair. We need time to discuss this. Wanda placed the offer on Raymond's work table. Betty needs time. The rest of you don't control the decision. Eric picked up the probate clarification. I can still challenge the distribution. You can file whatever you believe is proper, Betty said. Until something changes, the order stands. This is Dad's final piece. Yes, we're his children. Yes, and you're going to take all of it. Betty looked at the vessel. The glaze shifted as afternoon light entered the open doors. Raymond's last firing had produced one finished piece, not a hidden collection or a room of treasure. One object, protected by the kiln he built and the tablet he fired beneath it. The house and liquid estate were enough for both of you when this place was a liability, she said. I won't change the distribution because you were wrong about its value. Lauren touched the edge of Wanda's offer. A family auction could bring more, perhaps. Then why wouldn't you consider it? Because the highest bid isn't the only thing I'm deciding. Betty lifted the fired tablet with both hands after the conservator gave permission. The small piece of clay was heavier than it looked. The order established ownership. The shared firing authenticated Raymond's intention. The offer gave Betty the power to clear the taxes, finish the building, and choose what happened next. She placed the tablet beside the vessel. "No one removes either piece today," she said. "Wanda's offer will stay on this table until I decide. The decision is mine." The room remained quiet after she spoke. Eric put the clarification back on the table. "You've made up your mind already." "No. You didn't spend all this money to say no to Wanda. I spent it to open the wall safely." Lauren looked at the vessel. "Will you at least wait until we get another valuation?" "I'll consider any information brought to me without conditions." "That means yes?" "It means I'll consider it." Eric gathered the copies from his folder. "My objection stands." "It can stand on the shelf," Betty said. He left without saying goodbye. Lauren stayed long enough to help Wanda fold one camera stand. She didn't offer to touch the vessel, and Betty noticed that. At the office door, Lauren stopped. "If you sell it, will you tell me before it leaves?" "Yes." "Not after?" "Before." Lauren nodded and walked to her car. Betty spent that night at the small table with Wanda's offer beside her. The vessel remained in the locked workroom under the conservator's protective covering. Terry took the kiln room key home because the temporary opening couldn't yet be secured from that side. Betty made 3 lists. The first covered the taxes and every repair bill already paid. The second covered what the building still needed: plumbing, roof work, insulation, a proper living space, safe kiln controls, workbenches, and permits. The third covered what the sale would cost her. Raymond's final piece would leave the room where he made it. Betty would not drink coffee beside it or pass it on her way to the sink. Other people would look at it under gallery lights and read his name before hers. She also knew the vessel couldn't remain in a cold workshop indefinitely. It required stable temperature, careful support, and insurance she couldn't afford. By morning, the third list had not become shorter. The first 2 had become clearer. She called Wanda at 7. "I'll accept the offer with conditions." Wanda didn't pretend she hadn't been waiting near the phone. "Name them." "The vessel and tablet stay together." "Yes." "The tablet is displayed where people can read it." "Yes." "The firing record includes Terry's photographs, your intake sheet, the conservator's report, and my kiln note. Raymond's kiln note. It was in my desk." Wanda heard the correction in Betty's voice. "Your copy of Raymond's note," she said. "And I approve any public description of how it was found. That will involve the gallery's wording too. Then we agree on the wording before publication." There was a pause. "Fair," Wanda said. "The purchase money must clear before the tax deadline." "It will. And conservation costs remain with the gallery. They already do." Betty looked through the office window at the covered shape. "Then prepare the contract." The gallery transferred a deposit that afternoon. The full payment followed after the conservator completed the condition report and confirmed the vessel could be moved without further treatment. Betty paid the county $12,400 2 weeks before the deadline. The receipt was 1 page. It carried no understanding of what she had sold to obtain it. The clerk stamped the balance paid, returned the paper, and called the next person forward. Betty stood outside the county building and photographed the receipt. She sent copies to Lauren and Eric. Lauren replied, "I'm glad it's safe." Eric didn't reply. The next morning, an email from him arrived with the subject estate claim. He wrote that he reserved the right to challenge the transfer, the authentication, and the sale. He also demanded copies of the contract and conservator's report. Betty forwarded it to the probate attorney. The answer was brief. Eric could request public estate records. The private sale contract belonged to Betty. The order gave him no ownership interest in the pottery contents, and the authenticated shared firing made it difficult to argue the objects had entered the building after distribution. Eric never filed anything. He told Lauren the legal fees would cost more than the argument was worth. That was easier for him than saying he had been wrong. Betty gave him a copy of the conservator's final report anyway. She didn't send the sale contract. When he called, his voice was controlled. "You didn't have to keep the price private. You heard the offer. I mean the terms. The terms are mine. Dad would have wanted us involved. Your father cut my name into clay. That doesn't mean he wanted you to shut us out. I invited you to the opening. That isn't involvement. No, it's access. You keep confusing the two. Eric went silent. Can I still come by? He asked. If you call first. I'm your son. Yes. I shouldn't need an appointment. You need permission to enter my workroom. What about just visiting? Call first. He ended the conversation without agreeing. 3 days later, he called before turning into the drive. Betty let him visit for coffee in the office. He didn't apologize. He also didn't try the kiln room door. That was the boundary he could manage. Lauren came the day before the vessel left. She stood in the workroom while the conservator wrapped the piece in soft material and fitted a transport frame around its body. It looks smaller covered, Lauren said. It isn't. I know. Betty checked each support point against the condition report. Lauren watched her. I didn't know you did all the packing for Dad. You were living in Provo when the large orders started. I thought he handled it. He handled the clay. I handled what happened after. Lauren touched the edge of a nearby work table. There's a lot I thought he handled. Betty looked at her but didn't fill the silence. I'm sorry about the house, Lauren said. Which part? The question made Lauren uncomfortable. An apology had sounded complete until Betty asked her to name the damage. The way we arranged everything. The downstairs room. Bringing your things in the van, you also took the house while I wasn't able to think clearly. We followed the agreement. Yes, you signed it. Yes. Lauren looked toward the covered vessel. I don't know how to fix that. You don't fix it by saying you're sorry besides something valuable. Lauren flinched, then nodded. What can I do? Betty pointed toward the ledger cabinet. Raymond's ordinary tools need cataloging, not for sale. I need to know what's usable, what needs repair, and what can be given to people who work here. You want me to help? I'm asking whether you'll do the work. When? Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. Lauren took out her phone and added it to her calendar. I'll be here. We'll see. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a task with a time attached. Wanda arrived with the final acquisition papers and a draft announcement for the gallery's website. Betty read the line twice. That tells people where the surprise is, Wanda said. It also makes clear what you survived. It makes my life sound like a dare someone won. What would you prefer? Betty took a pencil. She crossed out the headline and wrote, Raymond Doyle's Final Vessel, preserved by Betty Doyle. This is about the work and why it survived, she said. The rest can be explained without making my children the exhibit. Wanda read the replacement. You're protecting them. I'm protecting the pottery from becoming a family spectacle. That distinction may be too fine for most people. It isn't too fine for me. Wanda accepted the change. The vessel left through the wide workroom doors on a padded lift. Betty stood beside the sign while the transport crew secured it inside the gallery van. She kept the blue test tiles at the pottery. The tablet traveled in a separate protected case, then would be displayed beside the vessel. Raymond's last piece had spent months sealed from everyone. Now it would stand where people could see it, with Betty's name cut into the object that explained why. After the van left, the workroom looked larger. Terry stood at his bench with both hands in his jacket pockets. It's quiet without it, he said. It was quiet before, not the same way. No. He offered to delay rent while the kiln wall was rebuilt. Betty refused. You have a working bench and water. The kiln isn't ready. Then your firing charges are zero. He paid the next month on time. Betty used part of the sale money to finish the roof and hire proper work on the living area. She paid every contractor, including Terry, at the agreed rate. Nobody received ownership in exchange for helping her. Nobody could later say the pottery existed because they had rescued it. The remaining money stayed in Betty's account under her name. On Saturday, Lauren arrived at 9 carrying work gloves, labels, and 2 coffees. One was black. Betty accepted the cup and tasted it. You remembered. I should have remembered before. Betty set the coffee beside the ledger cabinet. Aprons are on the hooks. Dust masks are in the top drawer. We start with hand tools. Lauren put on an apron without being asked again. They worked at the long table. Betty read each tool's condition while Lauren attached a number and entered it on a sheet. Wire cutter, usable. Number 12. Wooden rib, cracked. Discard? No. Repair box. Lauren placed it in the correct box. She didn't suggest selling anything. She didn't ask about the gallery payment. When her phone rang, she stepped outside rather than answer beside the records. Near noon, she found a set of trimming tools wrapped in an old cloth. "These have your initials," she said. Betty checked them. "Raymond kept losing mine, so I marked them. Did you use these for the glaze feet and for cleaning the bottoms before firing?" Lauren looked at the narrow blades. "I thought Dad did that." "He did when his hands were steady." "And after?" "I did." Lauren entered Betty's initials in the catalog. That small act mattered more than another apology would have. The record would no longer turn every piece of labor into Raymond's work by default. At 1, Betty closed the ledger. "We're finished for today. There are 2 shelves left. They'll be here next Saturday. I can stay." "I can't." Lauren looked at Betty's taped fingers and removed her gloves. "All right." She returned the following Saturday at 5 minutes before 9. On the 3rd Saturday, she brought replacement handles for the repair box after asking Terry which ones would fit. She paid for them herself and left the receipt with Betty. Betty reimbursed her. "You don't have to," Lauren said. "I do if they belong to the Pottery." Lauren accepted the money. Their conversations remained careful. They spoke about tools, roof paint, and whether the blue dishes needed a lower shelf. They didn't pretend the house agreement had vanished. Betty still had no key to North Main Street, and Lauren didn't offer one. One morning, Lauren asked whether Betty wanted the old dining table. "No," Betty said. "It was yours for years. It belongs in that dining room. I thought you might miss it. I miss meals at it. That isn't the same as needing the table." Lauren nodded. A week later, she brought Raymond's remaining pottery notebooks from the house. She had placed them in order and made copies for herself before handing over the originals. "These belong here," she said. Betty checked the boxes. "Yes." Lauren looked toward the office where Betty's mother's blue dishes stood in an open cabinet. "Can I have copies of the firing pages? You may copy any page you want. The originals stay." Agreed. That was how repair began between them. A person asked. The other person answered. No one treated access as ownership. Eric took longer. He called before visiting, though sometimes he waited until he was already parked near the road. "You said call first," Betty reminded him one afternoon. "I haven't entered. Call before you drive over. Does 5 minutes matter?" "It matters if I'm busy." He looked through the workroom window. Terry was trimming the foot of a bowl at his rented bench. "I could help with the construction," Eric said. "I know people who can get materials cheaper. If I need a recommendation, I'll ask." "You don't trust me. I don't trust an offer that arrives with control attached." "I didn't say anything about control. You said you know people. Next comes the price, then the favor, then why your plan should decide the room." Eric leaned against his truck. "You think you understand everything I'm going to say." "No. That's why I'm asking you to wait until I ask." He didn't like it. He followed the rule. On his next visit, he brought the old wooden stool Raymond had kept in the garage. "I found this behind the mower," he said. "Do you want it?" Betty checked the legs. "Yes." "Where should I put it?" "Beside the standing table." He carried it there and left it without rearranging anything else. He never admitted that the developer plan had been wrong. He said the sale to Wanda had worked out, as if good luck had corrected an otherwise reasonable judgment. Betty stopped trying to lead him toward a better confession. His actions remained limited but clear. He called. He asked before entering. When Betty said she was working, he left. That was the relationship available for now. The vessel went on display at the gallery in early summer. Wanda had placed it in a quiet room, with enough space to walk around it. The ownership tablet stood in a glass case beside the firing photographs and one of Raymond's glaze tests. The wall text named Raymond as the artist and Betty as the person who operated the pottery with him, preserved the kiln, and authorized the final work's conservation. Betty read the wording before the display opened. "You added operated," she said. "You told me preservation began before the wall was opened." It did. Wanda handed her a pencil. "Change anything you want." Betty crossed out one adjective that made the kiln sound mysterious. It had been sealed, not magical. Lauren attended the opening and stood beside Betty without directing visitors toward her. Eric arrived late. He read the tablet, then spent several minutes looking at the vessel from the side, where Raymond's blue glaze caught the light. Neither child asked about the sale money. When a visitor approached Betty and called the discovery lucky, Lauren answered before Betty could. "My mother kept the records, hired the repairs, and opened the chamber properly," she said. "Luck didn't do that." Betty glanced at her. Lauren didn't look for approval. She simply moved aside so the visitor could speak directly to Betty. Work at the Pottery continued after the gallery opening. The office wall was insulated. A licensed crew added a compact bathroom and a small sleeping area with proper ventilation and a separate exit. The permit stayed in a folder Betty could understand. She read every page before signing. She chose plain cabinets, durable flooring, and lever handles her stiff fingers could open. The narrow dresser from North Main Street fit beside the bed. When the bedroom was finished, Betty carried in the blue suitcase. She hung the dresses, placed her medicine in the bathroom cabinet, and folded Raymond's green sweater into the top drawer. The framed photograph of him at the wheel went on the wall beside the old gallery calendar. Then she stored the suitcase empty beneath the bed. The kiln took longer. Terry rebuilt the widened loading section with a removable, properly supported door. He installed new controls and wrote a maintenance schedule in large print. The old chamber remained recognizable, including the heat-darkened bricks Raymond had handled. They weren't hidden, but they no longer carried weight they weren't meant to carry. Before the first firing, Terry tested every circuit and ran the vent for an hour. Betty checked his list. "You missed the outside clearance." "I checked it. You didn't initial it." He took the pencil and added his initials. Now we load." They began with test tiles and Terry's uneven cup. Betty added 6 simple mugs she had made from rolled slabs, rather than forcing her hands around a spinning wheel. Their handles weren't identical. She didn't want them to be. The firing lasted into the evening. Terry watched the controls while Betty recorded temperatures. Neither relied on Raymond's old habits simply because they were familiar. When the kiln cooled, every test tile came out sound. Terry's cup leaned slightly but held water. Betty's mugs carried a soft brown glaze with a narrow blue line near each rim. She kept 2 for the office and placed 4 on the workroom shelf. The first paying Pottery group consisted of adults from Spring City who wanted an evening place to work with clay. Betty limited it to 6 benches. She handled registration, safety rules, payments, and materials. Terry maintained the kiln and taught wheel basics. Betty showed people how to wedge clay without straining their wrists. She taught them to label boards, clean glaze from a foot, and record what went into each firing. Nobody called her Raymond's helper. Lauren joined one Saturday session after paying the same fee as everyone else. Her first bowl collapsed. She looked toward Betty. "Can you fix it? I can show you how to begin again." Lauren gathered the clay and started over. Eric came for coffee on an open workroom afternoon. He called before leaving home. When he arrived, all 6 benches were occupied, so he waited in the office until Betty finished checking a glaze batch. "You're busy," he said. "Yes, I can come another time." Betty poured him coffee. "You can stay if you don't need me to stop working." He sat at the small table and watched people carry finished pieces to the drying shelves. He didn't offer a development plan. Before leaving, he asked whether the stool needed another coat of oil. "It does," Betty said. "May I take it home and do that?" "Yes, bring it back next Saturday." He returned it on Friday. By late summer, the Pottery income covered utilities, clay deliveries, routine maintenance, and Terry's share of firing work. It didn't need to produce another valuable discovery. The ordinary cups, bowls, repaired tools, and paid invoices were enough to keep it useful. Betty kept the tax receipt in the office drawer beside the kiln records. She kept no copy of Lauren's purchase offer on display. That paper belonged to the past, not the workroom. If stories about reclaiming dignity after family abandonment matter to you, subscribe and return for the next inheritance story. On the first cool evening of autumn, the last Pottery group washed its tools and left through the workroom door. Lauren carried her finished bowl to the drying shelf, then asked before taking one of Betty's blue-rimmed mugs for coffee. Eric had already gone after returning the stool. Terry checked the vent and hung the kiln log on its hook. He told Betty the mugs inside needed another hour before full cooling. "I know," she said. He smiled, put on his jacket, and locked his bench cabinet. Betty turned off the workroom lights one row at a time. The small lamp beside her bed glowed through the open door. Her empty suitcase remained beneath it. Clean blue dishes waited in the cabinet, and tomorrow's clay order lay on her own table. Outside, evening settled over North Main Street. The restored sign moved gently on its new chain. Betty checked the kiln temperature, recorded it in the log, and rested her palm on the handle. Finished mugs stood on the cooling shelf near the entrance, close enough to catch the last warm light. Betty closed the warm kiln at dusk. while finished mugs cooled beside her own front door.